The barn went silent except for one sound: hooves hammering against wood like thunder before a storm. Leanne Zhao stood 3 feet from a horse that had hospitalized 2 men and killed another man's dreams of ever riding again. She was the mail-order bride nobody wanted, the Chinese woman who'd arrived last month to a ranch full of suspicious eyes and harder hearts. But Caleb Rourke had chosen her anyway, and now everyone waited to see if his gamble would end in blood. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The morning Leanne Zhao first saw the black stallion, she understood why men feared it. It wasn't the size, though the horse stood nearly 17 hands high, muscles rippling under a coat that absorbed light like midnight water. It wasn't even the scars, the healed-over wounds on its flanks that spoke of barbed wire, bad falls, or worse treatment. No, what made the animal terrifying was its eyes. They held something Leanne recognized immediately, something she'd seen in the mirror on particularly difficult nights. The look of a creature that had decided the world was an enemy, and enemies deserved no mercy. "That's Devil's Creek," Caleb said quietly, standing beside her at the corral fence. His voice had that particular roughness that came from a man who spent more time talking to horses than people. "Came from a ranch up north. Owner died. Estate sold everything off. I shouldn't have bought him, but you saw something," Leanne finished, her English still carrying the sharp edges of Mandarin pronunciation, each word carefully placed like stones across a stream. Caleb glanced at her, surprised. 3 weeks they'd been married, and she still caught him off guard. "Yeah, something." The horse paced the far side of the corral, never taking its eyes off them. Paced and watched and paced. The other hands gave the enclosure a wide berth, took the long way around to the main barn rather than pass too close to those rails. "He hurt someone?" Leanne asked. "Broke Tommy Hendrick's arm in 2 places, cracked Jake Morrison's ribs, and that was just in the first week." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I should put him down. That's what everyone says. What makes sense?" But he hadn't, which told Leanne everything she needed to know about her new husband. He was the kind of man who saw the wounded thing beneath the violence, who couldn't quite bring himself to end something just because it was difficult. It was probably why he'd sent away for a bride from across an ocean when plenty of local women would have had him, why he'd chosen someone complicated instead of convenient. "They say that about me too," Leanne said softly, "that you should send me back." Caleb's weathered face darkened. "Who says that?" "I have ears. I hear how your men talk when they think I don't understand English well enough." She kept her gaze on the horse. "They think you made a mistake. Foreign wife, foreign ways. They wait for me to fail." "Well," Caleb shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the honesty that had suddenly bloomed between them like something wild and unnamed. "They can wait all they want." The horse screamed then, an awful, piercing sound that sent a ripple of alarm through the ranch. Several hands looked up from their work. Leanne saw them exchange glances, saw the way they measured distances, calculated risk. She recognized that look too, the mathematics of survival. "I want to try," she said. Caleb turned to her sharply. "Try what?" "With the horse. I want to try sit." "Leanne, you saw something in him worth saving, yes?" "Maybe I see something too." She finally met her husband's eyes. They were good eyes, she thought, honest and worried and trying so hard to do right by everything. The ranch, his hands, his strange new wife who didn't fit anywhere. "Or maybe I need to prove I'm not something that breaks easily." He studied her for a long moment. She wondered what he saw. The daughter of a fisherman from a coastal village no American could pronounce? The woman desperate enough to answer a mail-order advertisement and cross an ocean for a life with a stranger? Or something else, something even she hadn't fully recognized yet? "Not today," Caleb said finally. "Let me work with him first, see if—" "When then?" The question hung between them. When would she be ready? When would he trust her? When would anyone on this ranch look at her and see capability instead of liability? "Soon," Caleb said, which they both knew meant maybe never. But Leanne had learned patience the hard way, in a village where the sea took what it wanted and gave back only what it chose. She could wait, she could watch, she could learn. She just couldn't afford to fail. But proceed. The ranch house kitchen smelled of coffee and resentment when Leanne entered that afternoon. 3 of the hands sat around the heavy wooden table. Marcus, red-faced and thick-armed, who'd been with Caleb's family since before Caleb was born. Jake, still moving carefully after the ribs Devil's Creek had cracked. And young Tommy, whose left arm wore a cast covered in joking signatures that weren't quite jokes. They stopped talking when she came in. The silence felt deliberate, aggressive. "Coffee?" she offered, her accent making the word sound rounder, softer than they said it. "Got our own. Thanks," Marcus said, not looking up. Leanne moved to the stove anyway, began preparing the evening meal. Caleb would be in from the south pasture around 6. The work didn't stop for discomfort or awkward silences. She'd learned that fast. "Heard you were asking about Devil's Creek," Jake said after a minute. His tone was conversational, but Leanne heard the edge underneath. Cowboys, she'd discovered, could pack more threat into casual words than most men managed with shouting. "I was curious," she said, washing vegetables at the sink. "Curious," Marcus snorted. "That horse put Jake here out of work for a month. Tommy can't rope worth a damn with that arm, and she's curious." Maybe if Caleb had bought a normal horse instead of a foreign, Tommy started, then caught himself. But Leanne had heard the rest of that sentence before, even if he hadn't finished it this time. Foreign horse, foreign wife. Both unpredictable, both dangerous, both mistakes that would cost the ranch more than they were worth. "He's scared," Leanne said quietly, still focused on the vegetables. "Damn right he's scared," Jake muttered. "Horses got sense, at least." "No." Leanne turned to face them. "Not the horse. Not of us. He's scared of something else, something before." Marcus finally looked at her. "You know that how? You some kind of horse whisperer along with being mail order?" The casual cruelty of it should have stung, but Leanne had developed thicker skin than these men realized. "I know what fear looks like when it's old, when it's lived in someone so long they don't remember being without it." Something in her voice made the kitchen go quiet again, but differently this time. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. Even Marcus looked uncertain, like he'd poked something and gotten a response he hadn't expected. "The ranch where he came from," Leanne continued. "You know what happened there?" "Owner died," Jake said. "Heart attack or something. They sold everything, horses, equipment, land. Devil's Creek was supposed to go to auction, but Caleb bought him before that." "Why did you want him?" Leanne asked. "You must have known he was trouble." Caleb said, Tommy paused. Said he saw the horse once before the old man died. Said it was the finest piece of horseflesh he'd ever laid eyes on. Strong, smart, perfect conformation. But then something happened. When the horse came here, it was different, like something broke inside it. Leanne nodded slowly, understanding settling over her like snow. "So you didn't buy a broken horse. You bought a horse that got broken." "Makes it dangerous either way," Marcus said, but his tone had lost some of its sharp edge. "Maybe," Leanne agreed, turning back to her cooking. "Or maybe it makes it worth saving." The men left soon after, their coffee finished, their point made or not made or tangled somewhere in between. Leanne stood at the window, watching the sun paint the Montana sky in shades of copper and blood. In the distance, she could see the corral where Devil's Creek paced his eternal circuit. She understood that pacing. In her first weeks here, she'd walked the fence line of the ranch at night, unable to sleep, unable to settle, moving just to prove she could still choose her own direction. The ranch hands thought she was strange. Caleb thought she was adjusting. Nobody understood she was just doing what the horse did, testing the boundaries of her new cage. The difference was, she'd chosen this cage, chosen Caleb's sight unseen from a newspaper advertisement that promised hard-working rancher seeks companionship and partnership. Had chosen Montana over her fishing village, chosen possibility over certainty, chosen risk over the slow drowning of a life mapped out since birth. But Devil's Creek hadn't chosen anything. Something had happened to him, something that turned trust into terror, and now he lived in a prison made of his own fear. Leanne knew that prison too, knew it from the inside, which was exactly why she had to try. Eames. Caleb came in dusty and tired, smelling of leather and sun. He washed up at the pump outside before entering, a habit his mother had beaten into him young. Leanne set his dinner down as he sat, beef stew, heavy on the potatoes the way he liked, bread still warm from the oven. "Smells good," he said, and meant it. Whatever else was complicated between them, the cooking wasn't. Leanne had learned his tastes quickly, adapted her Chinese techniques to American ingredients, created something neither traditional nor foreign, but simply theirs. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Leanne had learned that Caleb didn't mind quiet, didn't feel the need to fill every space with words. It was one of the things she liked about him, the way he could sit with thoughts unspoken, trust that communication happened in more ways than talking. "Marcus said you were asking about Devil's Creek," he finally said. "I was." "Why?" Leanne considered the question, the food, her husband's tired eyes. "In my village," she began slowly, "there was a dog. Wild thing, lived on the edges, stole fish from nets, bit anyone who came close. Everyone said kill it. Dangerous, rabid maybe. But my father—" She paused, surprised by the sudden thickness in her throat. "My father watched it, watched how it favored one leg, how it flinched from raised hands. He said, 'That's not a mean dog, that's a hurt dog.'" "What happened?" Caleb asked quietly. "Father left food out, far from our house, where the dog felt safe. Not every day, he said that would make it dependent, but sometimes. And he never approached, never tried to touch. Just left the food and walked away. Let the dog choose." "Did it work?" "Took 2 years, but eventually that dog would sit outside our house some mornings. Never came inside, never let anyone pet it. But it stopped biting, stopped stealing. It chose to be near us instead of against us." Leanne met Caleb's eyes. "My father said the dog taught him something important. Healing doesn't happen on your timeline. It happens on theirs." Caleb pushed his stew around, thinking. "Horse isn't a dog." "No. Bigger teeth, stronger, more dangerous." She smiled slightly, but also more honest. "Dog might hide fear with submission. Horse shows you exactly what it feels." "And what do you think Devil's Creek feels?" "Betrayal," Leanne said simply. "Something happened that broke his trust. Now every human is the one who hurt him. Every hand reaching out is the one that caused pain. He can't tell the difference between then and now, between there and here." Caleb set down his spoon. "You got all that from watching him pace." "I got that from being him." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with a truth she hadn't meant to speak. But Caleb didn't push, didn't ask her to explain what she meant by that, just nodded like he understood, or at least understood enough. "The hands won't like it if you work with him," he said. "The hands don't like me anyway." "That's not—" Caleb started, then stopped, because they both knew it was true. "They'll come around. Maybe. Or maybe I prove myself first, then they come around." Leanne stood, began clearing plates. "But I can't prove myself by cooking and cleaning. That's not why you chose me." "What do you think I chose you for?" The question held genuine curiosity, no trap in it. Leanne thought about the advertisement she'd answered, the letters they'd exchanged. His awkward but honest, hers carefully translated by a mission teacher who'd raised eyebrows at the whole arrangement. She thought about the photograph he'd sent, serious-faced in his Sunday clothes, and the one she'd sent back, wearing her best dress, and an expression she'd hoped conveyed capability more than beauty. "You didn't want easy," she said finally. "You wanted someone who could hold their own, someone strong enough for this life." "Yeah," Caleb admitted. "Yeah, I did." "Then let me be that person." He studied her across the kitchen, this small, quiet woman who'd traveled 6,000 miles to marry a stranger, who'd walked into a life where nothing was familiar and nobody was friendly, and who stood in his kitchen asking permission to risk her life with an animal that had already hospitalized 2 grown men. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "early. Just observation, no getting in the corral. You watch how he moves, how he reacts. We start slow." Leanne felt something unlock in her chest, some held breath she'd been keeping since she'd first seen the horse. "Slow is good. Slow is how you build trust." "Slow is how you stay alive," Caleb corrected, but gently. "That horse wants to hurt something, Leanne. Don't mistake fear for friendliness." "I won't," she promised. "I know the difference." That night, lying beside her husband in the darkness, still more strangers than lovers, still learning the landscape of each other's breathing, Leanne stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow. Thought about the horse that paced and the men who watched and the thin line between proving herself and destroying herself. She thought about her father's dog, how patient he'd been, how certain that gentleness was stronger than force. She thought about the ocean she'd crossed, how it looked calm from the shore but held currents that could drown you if you didn't respect them. And she thought about Caleb's question, what did she think he'd chosen her for? The truth was bigger than strength or capability. The truth was, he'd chosen someone who understood that some battles weren't about winning or losing. Some battles were about showing up every day, about refusing to quit even when quitting was easier, about believing that broken things could heal if you just gave them enough space and time and stubborn, unreasonable hope. Tomorrow, she would start showing the ranch what she was made of. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of turning distrust into something else. Tomorrow, she would meet Devil's Creek, not as an adversary, but as someone who spoke the same language of fear and survival. But tonight, she just breathed in the Montana darkness and felt the weight of all the watching eyes that would follow her come sunrise. The ranch held its breath, waiting, and so did she. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning where breath turned visible and the frost made the world look like it had been dipped in glass. Leanne dressed in layers, her thickest trousers, a flannel shirt that had belonged to Caleb's mother, boots that still felt too large but were the smallest the ranch had. She braided her hair tight and practical, the way she'd done since childhood for the hard work of hauling nets. Caleb was already in the barn when she arrived, mucking out stalls with the methodical rhythm of a man who'd done this 10,000 times. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway. "You're early," he said. "So are you. This is my usual time." "Then I guess it's mine too now." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face, quick and uncertain, like he was still figuring out if warmth was allowed. "Coffee's in the tack room, still hot." She found it in a dented thermos, poured herself a cup from the extra mug he'd brought. They stood together in the barn's half-light, drinking coffee and not talking, while the ranch woke up around them. Horses shifted in their stalls, chickens began their morning complaints. Somewhere in the distance, Marcus was cursing at a gate that had frozen shut overnight. Normal ranch sounds, familiar rhythms, except for the silence from the far corral where Devil's Creek stood like a shadow against the fence, watching them watch him. "He doesn't sleep much," Caleb said. "I've checked on him at midnight, 3 a.m., dawn. Always standing, always alert. Horses need to lie down to truly rest, but he won't. Thinks something will get him if he does." "How long can he go like that?" "Not forever. Eventually his body will force him down. But it's killing him slowly, the lack of real rest." Caleb's voice carried a weariness that went beyond the early hour. "I thought bringing him here, away from wherever hurt him, would help. But geography doesn't fix what's broken inside." Lynn thought about her own sleepless nights those first weeks, how she'd pace the fence line rather than lie in a bed that felt foreign beside a man who was kind but unknown, how exhaustion had finally forced her to stillness, but trust had come slower than sleep. "Show me what you know," she said. Caleb led her to the corral, stopped at a careful distance from the fence. Devil's Creek tracked their movement, ears flat, head lowered slightly, aggressive posture, ready to defend or attack. "See how he's standing?" Caleb said quietly. "Weight on his back legs, front free to strike. That's not relaxed. That's coiled." "Does he do that with everyone?" "Everyone. Everything. Had a barn cat wander too close last week. Horse damn near went through the fence trying to get at it." He shook his head. "It's not normal territorial behavior. It's panic dressed up as aggression." Lion studied the horse carefully. Black coat, white star on the forehead, one white sock on the rear left leg. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Have you tried approaching him?" "First week, yeah. Got close enough to touch the fence before he charged it. Nearly kicked the rails apart. Decided after that to just let him settle, see if time helped. Has it?" "No." They stood in silence, breathing visible in the cold air, while the horse stared back at them with eyes that held no trust, no curiosity, no hope of connection, just pure, distilled wariness. "In my village," Leanne said slowly, "there was a saying, the fisherman who fights the tide drowns, but the one who reads it survives. You can't force the ocean to behave. You have to understand its language first. Horse isn't an ocean. No, but fear is. And that horse is drowning in it." Caleb looked at her then, really looked, past the foreign features and careful English and all the obvious differences that made her strange to everyone here. You really think you can reach him? I think I have to try, because if I don't... She paused, searching for words that would explain what she barely understood herself. If I don't prove I'm not just Caleb's foreign wife, not just the woman who cooks and cleans, not just the mistake everyone thinks you made, then what am I doing here? What was the point of crossing an ocean if I just become invisible anyway? The honesty of it sat between them, raw and uncomfortable. Caleb shifted his weight, looked back at the horse, then at her again. You're not invisible, he said quietly, and you weren't a mistake. Tell that to Marcus, to Jake, to everyone who looks at me like I'm a problem waiting to happen. Marcus is old school, set in his ways. Jake's just sore from the ribs. They'll come around once they see... See what? Leanne interrupted. What exactly will make them accept me? How many meals do I cook? How much laundry do I do? That's not respect, Caleb. That's just tolerance. And I didn't come this far for tolerance. The force of her words surprised them both. Leanne rarely raised her voice, rarely pushed back so directly. But something about the horse, about the waiting, about the constant weight of judgment, had cracked something open inside her. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you need from me? Permission, time, space to fail if I'm going to fail? She met his eyes steadily. And for you to trust that I know what I'm doing, even when it doesn't look like anyone else's way of doing it. He considered this, jaw working as he thought it through. 2 conditions, he finally said. 1, you don't go in that corral alone. I'm there, or Marcus, or someone who can pull you out if it goes wrong. 2, first sign of real danger, you stop. No heroics, no proving points. You stop. Agreed. And Leanne? He waited until she looked at him. This horse has hurt people, good people, strong people, people who knew what they were doing. Whatever you're seeing in him, whatever you think you understand, don't let that make you stupid. Empathy doesn't stop hooves from breaking bones. I know, she said softly. I know what I'm risking. Do you? The question held weight, because I'm starting to think this isn't just about the horse for you. He was right, of course. It was about proving herself, about claiming space in a world that hadn't made room for her, about showing everyone, Caleb included, that she was more than the desperate foreign bride who'd answered an advertisement out of necessity. But it was also simpler than that. It was about looking at a scared, violent, broken thing and seeing herself reflected back. About believing that if the horse could heal, maybe she could too. Maybe they both could. I'll be careful, she promised. That's not what I asked. I know. Leanne turned back to the corral, to the horse that paced and watched and waited for the world to hurt him again. But it's the best answer I have right now. Ma. Word spread fast on a ranch. By mid-morning, when Leanne returned to the corral with Caleb, they had an audience. Marcus leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Jake sat on a fence post nearby, favoring his healing ribs. Tommy watched from a cautious distance, his casted arm a reminder of what the horse could do. Even old Pete, who usually kept to himself in the equipment shed, had wandered over to see the show. Because that's what they expected, Leanne realized. A show. Entertainment. The foreign bride making a fool of herself, proving exactly what they'd suspected all along. Quite the crowd, she said quietly to Caleb. They're curious. They're hoping I fail. Some of them, maybe. He adjusted his hat, uncomfortable with the truth of it. But some are just protective. They've seen what that horse can do. They don't want to see you hurt. Leanne doubted that was true for most of them, but she appreciated Caleb trying. What do I do first? Nothing, he said. You watch, you observe, you don't approach, don't make sudden movements, don't do anything that might trigger him. Just stand here and let him get used to your presence. It sounded simple, boring even. It was possibly the hardest thing Leanne had ever done, because Devil's Creek didn't ignore her. The moment she stepped up to the fence, still a safe distance back, not close enough to threaten, the horse's entire demeanor changed. His head came up sharply, his ears pinned flat against his skull, and he moved. Not away, which might have been fear. Toward them, which was aggression. He charged the fence with a violence that made Leon's heart slam against her ribs. Hooves thundered. Dirt exploded. The horse's scream split the morning air. Raw, furious, territorial. He hit the fence rails with his chest, and the whole structure shuddered. Wood creaked. Nails groaned. For one terrible second, Leanne thought the fence would give, thought the horse would come through it, and all the watching cowboys would see exactly what happened when foreign brides got ideas above their station. But the fence held, and Leanne didn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to run, her muscles locked, preparing for flight. But she'd grown up on boats in rough seas, had learned young that panic kills faster than danger. So she stood her ground, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. The horse pulled up short on the other side of the fence, so close she could see the whites of his eyes, could smell the sharp scent of his sweat and rage. He stamped, snorted, tossed his head in a threat display that would have sent most people scrambling. Leanne just watched him. Jesus Christ, someone muttered behind her. Marcus, probably. Get back, Caleb said urgently, his hand on her arm. Leanne, get back from the fence. But she didn't. Because in that moment, staring into the horse's furious eyes, she saw something the others couldn't see. Something that changed everything. The horse wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on Caleb, on the hand Caleb had placed on Leanne's arm, on the men standing behind them. Devil's Creek wasn't charging Leanne. He was positioning himself between her and the men. The aggression wasn't directed at her. It was directed at them. Let go of my arm, Leanne said quietly. What? Let go. Step back. All of you, step back. Leanne, that horse is about to... He's protecting territory, not attacking. I'm inside what he considers his space, and you reaching for me looks like a threat. Step back. Caleb hesitated, every protective instinct warring with her words. But something in her voice, the absolute certainty of it, made him release her arm and take 3 slow steps backward. The horse's demeanor shifted immediately. The ears came forward slightly, the head lowered. He took 2 steps back from the fence, watching Leanne warily but no longer postured for attack. Dead silence from the watching men. I'll be damned, Jake said softly. Leanne didn't turn around, didn't break eye contact with the horse. He's territorial about his space, but I'm not the threat. You are. That doesn't make sense, Marcus argued. We're the ones who've been here feeding him, trying to control him, Leanne interrupted, trying to force him to accept you. And every time you approach, he sees it as an invasion, but I haven't tried to control him yet. I'm just present. She took a slow, careful breath, then did something that made Caleb's breath catch. She turned her back on the horse. Leanne, don't... But she was already moving, walking away from the fence in slow, deliberate steps. Not running, not afraid, just removing herself from the horse's territory, showing him she had no intention of pressing further. Behind her, she heard the horse moving. Every nerve in her body screamed danger, but she kept walking, slow, steady, giving him space. When she reached Caleb, she finally turned around. Devil's Creek stood in the center of the corral, no longer at the fence, no longer aggressive, watching her with an expression that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't pure hostility either. Curiosity, maybe. Or just confusion that she hadn't behaved like the others. What the hell was that? Marcus demanded. That, Leanne said, her heart still racing but her voice steady, was the first conversation. Conversation? Jake shook his head. Lady, that horse was about to kill you. No, he was about to defend himself. There's a difference. She looked at Caleb. You said he came from a ranch where something bad happened, where the owner died. Did anyone else get hurt there before the horse was sold? Caleb frowned, thinking. Actually, yeah. The owner's son was in some kind of accident, horse-related, I heard, but I don't know details. Why? Because I think Devil's Creek didn't just lose someone. I think he hurt someone, or thinks he did. And now he's terrified of it happening again, so he keeps everyone away. It's not just fear, it's guilt. The idea hung in the air, strange and unsettling. Cowboys didn't generally think of horses as capable of guilt, of complex emotions beyond basic fear and comfort. But Leanne had seen something in those eyes, something that went beyond simple trauma. That's a hell of a lot to get from one charge at a fence, Marcus said skeptically. Maybe, Leanne admitted. Or maybe I recognize it because I know what it looks like to carry blame that isn't entirely yours, but feels like it is. The personal nature of the comment made the men uncomfortable. Caleb shifted his weight, uncertain whether to ask what she meant or let it lie. Leanne didn't elaborate. Some truths were too complicated for a cold Montana morning with an audience. What's the next step? Caleb finally asked. Same as today. I come out here, I stay at the fence, I let him get used to me. Not as a threat, not as someone trying to change him, just as someone who shares space. She looked at the horse, still watching from the center of his corral. Trust isn't built in a day. It's built in 100 small moments of not being hurt when you expect it to be. That could take weeks, Marcus pointed out. Then it takes weeks. We don't have weeks. Caleb needs to either train that horse or get rid of it. Can't keep a dangerous animal around just hoping it'll get better. Why not? Leanne turned to face the old cowboy directly. You're keeping me around, aren't you? The comment landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading outward. Marcus's face reddened. Jake suddenly found his boots very interesting. Even Caleb looked caught between defending her and not wanting to make things worse. But Leanne was done being careful, done tiptoeing around the truth everyone knew, but nobody said. You all think I'm the mistake, yes? The dangerous unknown element that Caleb brought to the ranch without thinking it through. Foreign wife who doesn't know your ways, doesn't speak perfect English, might cause problems. She kept her voice even, factual. And you're waiting to see if I'll prove you right or surprise you. Well, that horse is doing the same thing, waiting to see if I'll hurt him like the others did. And I'm going to prove to both of you that sometimes the dangerous thing isn't actually the problem. Sometimes it's just scared and needs someone patient enough to understand that. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving stunned silence behind her. Caleb caught up with her halfway across the yard. That was, he started. True, Leanne supplied. I was going to say brave. Stupid maybe, but brave. I'm tired of being quiet, she said simply. Tired of making myself small so everyone else feels comfortable. I crossed an ocean, Caleb. Left everything I knew. I'm not doing that just to disappear into your kitchen and pretend I'm grateful for tolerance. I know you're not. He fell into step beside her. But you're also making enemies you don't need to make. They were already enemies. I'm just making them uncomfortable now. Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing. The thing you said about carrying blame that isn't entirely yours. Different conversation, Leanne cut him off gently. Different day maybe, but not now. He accepted that, which she appreciated. One of Caleb's better qualities was knowing when to push and when to give space. They walked in silence until they reached the house. Leanne paused at the door, looking back toward the corral where Devil's Creek had resumed his pacing. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me try. For not deciding I was too fragile or too foreign or too female to work with a dangerous horse. Leanne, I brought you here because I thought you were strong enough for this life. I'm not about to prove myself wrong by treating you like you're breakable. It was possibly the most romantic thing he'd ever said to her, though she doubted he meant it that way. Caleb wasn't a man of flowery words or grand gestures, but in his practical, quiet way, he was telling her he saw her as an equal. It was more than her father had ever offered her mother, more than her village had offered any woman. It was, in its way, everything she'd hoped for when she'd answered that advertisement. I'm going to prove this was the right choice, she said. The horse or the marriage? Both. Caleb smiled then, a real one that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less weathered by responsibility. Yeah, he said, I believe you will. That night, Leanne couldn't sleep. She lay beside Caleb listening to his steady breathing, her mind racing through everything that had happened. The horse's charge, the men's skepticism, her own bold words that had felt right in the moment, but now seemed possibly reckless. Around 2 a.m., she gave up trying to rest and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her husband. She pulled on her heavy coat and boots and stepped out into the Montana night. The cold hit her like a physical thing, sharp and clean. Stars crowded the sky, more than she'd ever seen above her coastal village where ocean mist softened everything. Here, the darkness was absolute and the stars were infinite, and Leanne felt impossibly small beneath their cold light. She walked the fence line by instinct now, her nightly ritual of motion and thought. But tonight, instead of the usual circuit, she found her feet carrying her toward the far corral. Devil's Creek stood in the center of his pen, exactly where he'd been that afternoon. Awake, alert, watching her approach through the darkness. Leanne stopped at the fence, far enough back not to threaten. I understand, she said quietly into the night. in Mandarin first, then repeated in English, as if the horse might comprehend either language better than the other. I understand being so scared that you forget how to rest, forget what it feels like to put down the guard, and just be. The horse's ears swiveled toward her voice. Everyone here thinks I'm too soft, or too foreign, or too female to do this work. They think Caleb made a mistake bringing me. And maybe he did. I don't know yet. But I know what it's like to be the mistake everyone's waiting to fail. To be the thing that doesn't fit. She wrapped her coat tighter against the cold. My father wanted sons, got 3 daughters instead. I was the middle one, not special, not wanted, just there. My mother said I should be grateful any man would have me, that crossing the ocean for a stranger was better than spending my life gutting fish in a village that had no use for me, and maybe she was right. Or maybe I'm just trading one kind of not fitting for another. The horse took 2 steps closer, not threatening, just listening? Or maybe Leanne was projecting human emotion onto an animal that simply recognized the sound of a calm voice. But here's what I know, she continued. I know that scared things bite. I know that hurt things attack before they can be hurt again, and I know that everyone around you decides you're the problem, instead of seeing that you're just trying to survive in a world that hasn't been kind. She thought about her village, about the way women were taught to make themselves useful or invisible, those being the only 2 acceptable options. Thought about the long voyage across the Pacific, seasick and terrified, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Thought about arriving at the ranch to hostile stares and skeptical whispers, realizing that kindness from Caleb didn't equal acceptance from everyone else. So tomorrow, she said, I'm going to come back. And the day after that, and the day after that. Not to fix you or train you or make you something you're not. Just to show you that not every human is going to hurt you. That sometimes space is safer than force. That maybe, eventually, you can stop fighting every single moment just to survive. Devil's Creek was at the fence now, close enough that Leanne could hear his breathing. She didn't move toward him, didn't reach out, just stood in the shared space of night and cold and mutual wariness. We're going to figure this out, she whispered. Both of us, together. The horse watched her with eyes that caught starlight and reflected it back like dark water. And maybe it was exhaustion or hope or just desperate projection, but Leanne could have sworn she saw something shift in that gaze. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it, small and fragile as first light. She stood there until the cold drove her back inside, until her fingers went numb and her breath came in clouds. Stood there like a prayer, like a promise, like a woman refusing to break under the weight of everyone's expectations. And when she finally turned to leave, the horse didn't charge the fence. He just watched her go, and that felt like victory enough for one night. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more skeptical eyes and harder tests. But tonight, in the darkness between storms, Leanne, Zhao, and Devil's Creek had reached an understanding. They were both dangerous things that nobody wanted, and they were both worth saving anyway. The morning after her midnight vigil, Leanne woke to find Caleb already gone from bed. She dressed quickly, her muscles stiff from standing in the cold for too long, and made her way to the kitchen. Coffee sat warming on the stove with a note beside it in Caleb's careful handwriting. North pasture, back by noon. She poured herself a cup and stood at the window, watching the ranch come alive. Marcus was already working near the equipment barn, his movements efficient and unhurried. Jake limped past carrying feed buckets, still favoring those healing ribs. The world turned according to its rhythms, indifferent to her plans or fears. But when she looked toward the far corral, Devil's Creek was watching the house. Not pacing, not agitated, just standing near the fence facing her direction, as if he'd been waiting. Leanne's heart did something complicated in her chest, part hope, part terror, all commitment. She drained her coffee, pulled on her coat, and headed outside. The morning air bit at her face as she crossed the yard. Frost made the grass crunch under her boots. Her breath came in white clouds that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. Winter was coming hard and fast to Montana, the kind of cold that her coastal village had never known, the kind that could kill if you weren't careful. She stopped at her usual distance from the fence. Devil's Creek tracked her approach but didn't charge, didn't scream, didn't show any of yesterday's explosive aggression. He just watched. "Good morning," Leanne said quietly, feeling foolish talking to a horse but doing it anyway. Her father had talked to the sea, to the nets, to the fish they caught. Words didn't have to be understood to matter. Sometimes speaking was just a way of claiming space in the silence. The horse's ears flicked forward, then back, processing. Leanne settled into stillness the way she'd learned to do on boats waiting for the tide to turn. Patience was a muscle you built through practice, through hours of waiting for fish to find the nets, for storms to pass, for the right moment to pull or push or simply hold steady. She had no idea how long she stood there. Long enough for her toes to go numb in her boots. Long enough for the sun to climb higher and burn off some of the frost. Long enough for Marcus to walk past twice, giving her suspicious looks both times, but saying nothing. And slowly, gradually, Devil's Creek began to relax. It started with his ears, which stopped their constant swiveling and settled into a more natural position. Then his weight shifted from that coiled, ready-to-explode stance into something more balanced. His head lowered slightly. Not submission, horses didn't think in those terms, but a reduction in the alert level that had been his constant state since arriving at the ranch. Leanne felt her own breathing deepen in response. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been, mirroring his tension, until his body began to soften and hers followed. "That's it," she murmured. "Nothing's going to happen. No one's going to hurt you. We're just standing here together." The horse took 2 steps toward the fence. Not a charge, not aggressive. Just movement, curiosity maybe, testing to see what she would do. Leanne remained absolutely still. Another step. Another. Devil's Creek was close enough now that she could see the individual whiskers on his muzzle, the way his nostrils flared with each breath, the intelligence in those dark eyes that had been masked by fear and fury. He was beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful in the way dangerous things often were, powerful and unpredictable and completely, utterly itself. "I'm not going to reach for you," Leanne said softly. "Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. You decide when that happens. Not me. I'm just here." The horse stood at the fence, close enough that Leanne could have touched him if she'd wanted to betray the trust of this moment. But she kept her hands loose at her sides, her breathing steady, her body language as non-threatening as she could make it. They stayed like that for several minutes, woman and horse, separated by 3 rails of wood but connected by something neither could name. Not friendship, not yet. But recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that they were both trying to survive in a world that hadn't made space for them. Finally, Devil's Creek snorted, tossed his head once, and turned away. He walked back to the center of his corral, not running, not fleeing, just creating distance on his own terms. Lynn released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Well, I'll be damned." She turned to find Jake standing several yards behind her, his expression caught between surprise and something that might have been respect. "How long have you been there?" Leanne asked. "Long enough to see that." He gestured toward the horse. "Marcus said you were wasting your time, said that horse was too far gone for anything but a bullet. And what do you say?" Jake shifted his weight, wincing slightly as his ribs reminded him they weren't fully healed. "I say I've never seen that animal stand still for anyone, not even Caleb, and I definitely never saw him approach someone voluntarily." "He didn't approach. He investigated. There's a difference." "If you say so." Jake studied her with a directness that made Leanne uncomfortable. "You know what you're doing with horses?" "No," Leanne admitted. "I know what I'm doing with fear, the horse part I'm learning." Something in her honesty seemed to satisfy Jake. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just be careful. That thing's hurt 2 of us already. Don't want to make it 3. Because you care about my safety? Or because you don't want to be proven right about me being a mistake?" The question hung between them, sharp and challenging. Jake had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Both, maybe," he finally said. "Look, I'm not saying I think Caleb was wrong to bring you here. I'm just saying this ranch has rhythms, ways of doing things, and you're disrupting that. Makes people nervous. Change usually does." "Yeah, well." Jake turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, what you just did there, that took guts. Stupid guts, maybe, but guts nonetheless." He walked away before Leanne could decide if that was a compliment or an insult. Probably both, knowing cowboys. They seemed to wrap their respect in layers of skepticism and rough language, as if admitting someone had impressed them was some kind of weakness. Leanne looked back at Devil's Creek. The horse had returned to his pacing, but it seemed less frantic now, less desperate. Or maybe she was just projecting hope onto behavior that hadn't actually changed. Either way, it was progress. Small, fragile, easily broken progress, but progress nonetheless. She headed back to the house to start the day's chores, her mind already planning tomorrow's approach. The kitchen was chaos when she entered. Someone had tracked mud across the floor she'd scrubbed yesterday. Dishes from breakfast sat unwashed in the sink. The hands had eaten while she was with the horse, apparently deciding that cleaning up after themselves was still her job, not theirs. Leanne stared at the mess for a long moment, feeling something dangerous build in her chest. She'd crossed an ocean, faced down a violent horse, stood her ground against men who wanted her to fail, and now she was supposed to smile and clean up their mud and dishes like a good little wife? No. She left the kitchen exactly as it was and went to find Caleb. He was in the south barn, mending tack, with the focused attention he brought to everything. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, needle and thread repairing a bridle that had seen better days. He looked up when she entered, smiled in that quiet way of his. "How'd it go with the horse?" "Good. He came to the fence. Didn't charge, didn't threaten, just looked." Leanne paused. Jake saw it, seemed surprised. "Jake's not the only one." Caleb set down the bridle. "I figured it would take weeks before that horse even acknowledged your presence." "It might still take weeks before he trusts me. Coming to the fence isn't trust. It's just curiosity." "It's more than he's given anyone else." Caleb studied her face. "Something wrong? You look angry." "The kitchen's a mess, mud everywhere, dishes left out. Your men ate and walked away like I'm the maid." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'll talk to them." "No." Leanne's voice was firm. "I will. I need to establish something here, Caleb. Either I'm part of this ranch, a real part, not just the cook and cleaner, or I'm not. And if I'm a real part, then I get to set boundaries." He looked like he wanted to argue, to step in and smooth things over the way men often did when they thought they were protecting their wives. But something in Leanne's expression stopped him. "What are you going to do?" he asked carefully. "Have a conversation, establish expectations, make it clear that I'm not here to serve them." She softened slightly. "I'll cook and clean, Caleb. That's part of running a household, and I don't mind that work. But I won't be taken for granted. I won't be invisible." "You could never be invisible," Caleb said quietly. "Then I need to make sure they know it too." She found the hands gathered in the bunkhouse during their midday break, playing cards and drinking coffee that wasn't hers. Marcus, Jake, Tommy, and Pete all looked up when she entered. The room went quiet in that particular way it did when men weren't sure if they were in trouble. "We need to talk," Leanne said. Marcus set down his cards. "About?" "About respect, about expectations, about how this is going to work." "How what's going to work?" Tommy asked, genuinely confused. "Me. You. All of us living and working on the same ranch." Leanne didn't sit down, didn't make herself smaller or less threatening. She stood in the doorway and held her ground. "I will cook meals, I will keep the house clean, but I am not your maid. When you eat, you clean up after yourselves. When you track mud in, you wipe it up. When you use something, you put it back." "That's women's work," Marcus said, but without much conviction. "No. That's basic human courtesy. You managed to do it before I arrived. You'll manage to do it now that I'm here." "Mrs. Rourke," Jake started. "Leanne. My name is Leanne, and before you tell me that's too familiar or disrespectful or whatever excuse you're thinking, remember that you call Caleb by his first name. I expect the same courtesy." Pete, who'd been quiet until now, actually smiled. "Fair enough. Furthermore," Leanne continued, "I'm working with Devil's Creek. This isn't a hobby or a whim. It's part of my contribution to this ranch, which means when I'm with that horse, I'm working, same as you. I'm not neglecting duties or avoiding chores. I'm doing ranch work." "That horse is dangerous," Marcus began. "So are you, probably, if pushed hard enough. Everything on a ranch is dangerous. Cattle have horns. Equipment can crush you. Weather can kill you. But you don't avoid those things. You learn to work with them safely." Leanne's voice stayed level, factual. "I'm learning to work with the horse safely, and I'm asking you to respect that this is real work, not a woman's silly project." The room was silent for a long moment. The men exchanged glances, communicating in that wordless way they had. Finally, Marcus stood. "You want respect, you earn it. he said. That's how it works here. Man or woman, no difference. Agreed, and I am earning it. I'm just asking you to see it when I do. Leanne met his eyes steadily. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the same standards you hold each other to. No more, no less. And if we can't give you that, Marcus challenged, then you and I will have problems. And Caleb will have to choose between his wife and his hands. I don't think any of us want to put him in that position. She paused. But I also don't think it needs to come to that. I think you're all reasonable men who can adapt to having a woman on the ranch who isn't content to stay in the kitchen. Jake actually laughed at that. Content? Lady, I don't think anyone could accuse you of being content with anything. Good. Contentment is overrated. Leanne allowed herself a small smile. So we have an understanding? Pete nodded. Tommy shrugged, which was probably the best she'd get from him. Jake said, Yeah, all right. Marcus took longer, his weathered face working through considerations she could only guess at. Finally, you mess up with that horse, you get yourself hurt. Don't expect us to feel bad about saying we told you so. I wouldn't expect anything less, Leanne said. And when I succeed, I expect you to admit you were wrong. If you succeed? When? Marcus actually smiled at that. Just a slight quirk of his mouth, but it was there. You got spine, I'll give you that. Maybe Caleb knew what he was doing after all. It was the closest thing to approval she was likely to get from the old cowboy. Leanne accepted it with a nod and left them to their card game. When she returned to the house, she found Caleb waiting in the kitchen. He'd cleaned up the mud and done the dishes. The room was spotless. You didn't have to do that, Leanne said. I know, but I wanted to. He dried his hands on a towel. How'd it go? Better than expected, worse than hoped, somewhere in the middle. She moved to the stove, started preparing dinner even though it was hours away. Familiar work, comforting in its routine. They think I'm stubborn. You are stubborn. So are you. So is that horse. Maybe that's what it takes to survive out here. She began chopping vegetables with the efficient movements of someone who'd prepared thousands of meals. In my village, there was no space for stubborn women. You did what you were told, married who your family chose, lived the life that was expected. Stubbornness was a character flaw, something to be beaten out of girls before they grew into difficult wives. Caleb leaned against the counter, listening. He was good at that, at creating space for her to speak without filling it with his own words. My mother told me I would never find a husband if I didn't learn to bend, Leanne continued. Said my spirit would break me. But here's the thing. My spirit is the only reason I survived. It's what got me through the voyage across the ocean, through arriving at a ranch where nobody wanted me, through every hard day since. So if people think I'm stubborn, let them think it. Stubborn is what keeps me standing. It's one of the things I love about you, Caleb said quietly. Leanne's hand stilled on the cutting board. They didn't talk about love. Theirs was a practical marriage built on mutual need and careful respect. Love was something that might come later, or might not, and neither of them had pushed for declarations they couldn't honestly make. You don't have to say that, she said carefully. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. He moved closer, not touching but present. When I wrote that advertisement, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I needed someone strong enough for this life, someone who wouldn't break under the weight of it. And then your letter came. And there was something in the way you wrote, like you were challenging me to see you as an equal instead of asking permission to exist. I knew right then. You were exactly what this ranch needed. What about what you needed? Leanne asked. Same thing. The ranch and I aren't separate. We're just different parts of the same life. He paused. But you're right that I didn't think through how the hands would react. I should have prepared them better, should have made it clear from the start that you were coming as a partner, not a housekeeper. They're learning, I'm learning, we'll figure it out. Leanne returned to chopping, the rhythmic motion soothing. The horse is teaching me patience. The hands are teaching me to fight for space. You're teaching me that kindness and strength can exist in the same person. It's not the life I expected, but maybe it's better than what I thought I wanted. What did you think you wanted? Safety, stability, a place where I fit. She smiled, self-aware and slightly bitter. Turns out fitting is overrated. I'd rather be necessary than comfortable. Before Caleb could respond, the sound of hooves and shouting erupted from the yard. They both rushed to the window in time to see one of the horses from the main corral running loose, fence rails splintered, Marcus and Jake scrambling to catch it before it could hurt itself or damage anything else. "Damn it," Caleb muttered, already heading for the door. "That's the third time this month that fence has failed. I need to rebuild the whole section before winter really hits." Leanne followed him outside, watched as the hands finally cornered the spooked horse and led it back to the barn. The broken fence rails lay scattered in the dirt, old wood finally giving up after too many years of Montana weather and ranch work. An idea formed in her mind, crazy and probably doomed, but compelling nonetheless. "I'll help," she said. Caleb turned to her. "Help with what?" "Rebuilding the fence. I'm good with my hands, I learn fast, and you need the work done before the real cold sets in." She looked at the damage, calculating. "It would also show the hands that I'm willing to do any kind of ranch work, not just the horse training. Fence building is hard labor, Leanne. Heavy lifting, splinters, hours in the cold. I grew up hauling fishing nets. I know hard labor." She met his eyes. "Let me help. Let me be useful in ways they can't dismiss as woman's work or foreign notions." Caleb considered this, his practical mind weighing the offer against the reality of what she was proposing. "If you can't keep up, I'm not going to slow down for you. I wouldn't want you to. And if you get hurt, then I get hurt. Same as anyone else taking risks on a ranch." Leanne's voice was firm. "I'm not asking for special treatment, Caleb. I'm asking for the chance to prove I'm as capable as I claim to be." He looked at her for a long moment. This small woman with her careful English and stubborn spine, and something in his expression shifted. Pride, maybe, or recognition, or just the acknowledgement that he'd chosen well, even if the choosing had seemed reckless at the time. "All right," he said. "We start tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. Dress warm and bring gloves." That night, Leanne soaked her hands in warm water and thought about the week ahead. Between working with Devil's Creek each morning and helping rebuild the fence each afternoon, she'd have barely any time for the cooking and cleaning the hands still expected. Something would have to give. She decided it would be their comfort, not her ambitions. When morning came cold and dark, she was already dressed and waiting when Caleb emerged from the bedroom. They ate a quick breakfast of leftover bread and coffee, then headed to the corral where the fence needed rebuilding. Marcus was already there, examining the damage. He looked up when they approached, his expression unreadable when he saw Leanne. "She helping?" he asked Caleb. "She's working," Caleb corrected. "Same as the rest of us." Marcus grunted, which could have meant anything. "All right, let's see what she's got." The work was exactly as hard as Caleb had warned. The old fence rails had to be pulled out, the posts checked for rot and replaced where necessary, new rails cut to size and fitted into place. Leanne's hands, soft from weeks of kitchen work, blistered within the first hour. Her shoulders screamed, her back ached. The cold made everything harder, made wood brittle and fingers stiff. But she didn't stop, didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks that the men weren't taking. She worked through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the moment around mid-morning when she honestly thought she might vomit from the exertion. She worked because stopping meant proving them right, meant confirming that she was too weak or too foreign or too female for real ranch work, and she refused to give them that satisfaction. By noon, they'd replaced an entire section of fence. Marcus looked at the work, at Leanne's bleeding hands and determined face, and nodded. "Not bad," he said, which from him was practically a standing ovation. Jake, who'd been working alongside them despite his still healing ribs, actually clapped her on the shoulder. "You're tougher than you look." "I'd have to be," Leanne said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "Looking like I do, people expect me to break easily." "Yeah, well," Jake's weathered face creased into something almost like a smile. "Reckon we learned our lesson about assumptions." That afternoon, instead of returning to the fence work, Leanne went to Devil's Creek. Her hands were wrapped in bandages now, her entire body one continuous ache, but she'd promised herself she'd spend time with the horse every day, and she wasn't about to break that promise just because she was tired. The horse was waiting at his usual spot in the center of the corral. When Leanne approached the fence, he came forward immediately, not charging, not threatening, but with something that looked almost like anticipation. "Hello?" Leanne said softly, her voice carrying less strength than usual. "Sorry I'm late today." I was rebuilding fence with the men. My hands hurt, my back hurts, everything hurts. But I'm here. Devil's Creek moved closer to the fence than he'd ever come before, close enough that Leanne could have reached through the rails and touched him if she'd dared. But she kept her wrapped hands at her sides, kept her breathing steady despite the sudden spike of adrenaline that came from having 1,000 pounds of unpredictable animal within striking distance. The horse lowered his head, sniffing at her through the fence rails. Leanne held absolutely still, barely breathing, while Devil's Creek investigated her scent. She smelled like work now, like sweat and wood and the same labor that the men carried on their skin. Maybe that made her less foreign to him, less other. Or maybe he was just learning that she showed up every day, that she didn't push or demand or force, that she simply offered presence and patience and the possibility of something different than what he'd known before. After what felt like forever, the horse huffed out a breath, warm against her face despite the cold air, and stepped back. Not fleeing, just creating distance. But his ears stayed forward, his posture relaxed, his eyes holding something that wasn't quite trust but was definitely less fear than before. "Good boy," Leanne whispered. "Good brave boy. You're doing so well." She stayed at the fence until the cold drove her back inside, until her wrapped hands were too stiff to flex and her legs were shaking with exhaustion. But as she walked away, she felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she'd been carrying since she first arrived at the ranch. She was proving herself, to the horse, to the hands, to Caleb. But more importantly, she was proving something to herself, that she was strong enough for this life, capable enough for this challenge, stubborn enough to see it through even when everything hurt and everyone doubted. The kitchen was cold when she entered. She'd been too busy with fence work and horse training to keep the stove going, to prepare the elaborate meals the hands had come to expect. For dinner that night, she served simple stew from yesterday's leftovers, bread that was a day old, coffee that was strong but unadorned. The hands ate without complaint. Marcus even came back for seconds. And when Leanne finally collapsed into bed that night, every muscle screaming, hands throbbing despite the bandages, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she belonged. Not because anyone had welcomed her, not because the ranch had made space for her, but because she'd carved out that space herself. Through work and stubbornness and refusing to break when breaking would have been easier. Beside her, Caleb shifted in his sleep, his arm coming to rest across her shoulders in a gesture that was becoming familiar. Protective, yes, but also trusting, like he was beginning to believe that she could hold up her end of this partnership they'd built. Outside, a cold wind rattled the windows and promised snow before morning. The ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms, horses sleeping, cattle huddled together for warmth, the land itself breathing in that particular way wild places did when humans finally stopped moving through them. And in the far corral, Devil's Creek finally lay down to rest. Lynn woke to Caleb shaking her shoulder, his voice urgent in the pre-dawn darkness. "Something's wrong with the cattle in the north pasture. I need to go check it out." She sat up, blinking away sleep, her body immediately protesting the movement. Every muscle from yesterday's fence work screamed, "I'll come with you." "No need, stay warm. I'll be back in a few hours." He was already pulling on his heavy coat, his movements quick and efficient. "Marcus and Jake are coming. We'll handle it." Before she could argue, he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs, the front door closing with a finality that left the house feeling empty. Leanne lay back down, listening to the sounds of horses being saddled, men's voices calling to each other in the yard, hoofbeats fading into the distance. She should go back to sleep. Her body needed rest. But something kept her awake, some formless anxiety that had nothing to do with cattle or cold mornings. Finally, she gave up on sleep and dressed in the darkness. The house was silent, except for the settling sounds old buildings made. The creak of wood adjusting to temperature changes. The whisper of wind finding gaps in the walls. She made coffee by feel more than sight. Stood at the kitchen window watching the sky slowly lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gray that preceded sunrise. Movement caught her eye. Someone was at the far corral. Leanne's first thought was that one of the hands had stayed behind, was checking on Devil's Creek. But as the light grew stronger, she realized it wasn't any of the regular ranch workers. It was someone smaller, younger, moving with a casual confidence that spoke of familiarity with horses. Tommy. With his casted arm and his barely concealed resentment of both the horse that had broken it and the foreign woman who thought she could fix what he couldn't, Lynn set down her coffee and headed outside. The cold hit her like a slap. Frost coated everything, turning the ranch into something crystalline and dangerous. Her breath came in white clouds as she crossed the yard, her boots crunching on frozen ground. Tommy was at the fence now, holding something in his good hand. A rope. Not a lead rope for gentle handling, but something heavier, rougher. The kind you used for cattle, for force. "What are you doing?" Leanne called out. Tommy spun around, guilt flashing across his young face before hardening into defiance. "Nothing, just checking on the horse." "With a rope?" "Thought I'd try working with him, since you're so sure it can be done." His voice carried a challenge, an edge that made Leanne's stomach tighten. "Not like that. Not with that equipment." "Why? Because you say so?" Tommy took a step toward the corral gate. "You've been here, what, a month? And suddenly you're the expert on this horse? I grew up on this ranch. I've worked with horses my whole life. But I break one arm and everyone acts like I'm useless." "Tommy, don't." Leanne moved closer, careful to keep her voice calm. "This isn't about proving yourself. That horse isn't ready for what? For someone who actually knows what they're doing instead of just standing around talking to it like it's a person." He fumbled with the gate latch, his casted arm making the simple task difficult. "I can fix this horse in one session. Show Caleb that buying him wasn't a mistake. Show all of you that just because I got hurt doesn't mean I'm incompetent." Inside the corral, Devil's Creek had gone rigid. His head was up, ears flat, every line of his body screaming alarm. He recognized the rope, recognized the intent, recognized the threat. "Tommy, please." Leanne kept her distance but put as much authority as she could into her voice. "You go in there with that attitude, with that equipment, you're going to get hurt again. Or worse, you're going to undo everything that horse has started to build toward trust." "Trust." Tommy laughed, bitter and young. "That animal doesn't need trust, it needs discipline. It needs someone strong enough to show it who's boss. And I'm tired of standing around watching you play therapist when what that horse needs is a firm hand and clear boundaries." He got the gate open. Devil's Creek screamed, that awful, piercing sound that spoke of pure terror masquerading as rage. He backed away, hooves striking the frozen ground, muscles coiling for violence. "Tommy, don't!" Leanne shouted. But Tommy was already inside the corral, rope in hand, moving toward the horse with the kind of confidence that came from ignorance or desperation or both. "Easy," he said, his voice too loud, too aggressive. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." The horse didn't believe him. Why would he? Everything in Tommy's approach screamed danger. The rope, the posture, the energy that promised force would follow if cooperation didn't come immediately. Devil's Creek charged. It wasn't like the charges Leanne had witnessed before where the horse was testing boundaries or warning someone away. This was pure attack, survival instinct kicking in when cornered by a perceived threat. Tommy tried to dodge, but his broken arm threw off his balance. He went down hard, the rope flying from his hand. The horse reared above him, hooves poised to strike, and in that split second, Leanne saw exactly how this would end. Tommy crushed, the horse destroyed for the attack. All the fragile progress she'd built demolished in one moment of masculine pride and stupidity. She didn't think. She just moved. Leanne vaulted the fence with more speed than grace, landed hard in the corral, and put herself between Tommy and the horse. Her hands came up, not in defense, not in threat, just presence. Just the silent claim of space. "No," she said. Not shouted, not screamed, just said, firm and clear and absolutely certain. "No." Devil's Creek's hooves came down 6 inches from her head. She felt the displacement of air, felt the power that could have killed her if the horse had chosen to follow through. But something in her voice, in her stillness, in her complete lack of fear smell made the animal hesitate. His eyes found hers, wild and terrified and so close to breaking completely. "It's okay," Leanne said softly, her heart slamming against her ribs, but her voice steady. "It's okay. He's leaving. He's not going to hurt you. I promise." Behind her she heard Tommy scrambling backward, heard him hit the fence and curse, heard him finally getting smart and getting out. But Leanne didn't move. Couldn't move. Because the horse was right there, close enough to bite or strike or destroy. And the only thing keeping him from it was the thin thread of connection they'd been building over weeks of patient presence. "I know you're scared," she continued, her voice low and rhythmic like a song. "I know you wanted to protect yourself. That's okay. That's allowed. But I need you to trust me now, just for a moment, just long enough for both of us to breathe." The horse's sides were heaving. Sweat darkened his coat despite the cold. His ears swiveled, listening, trying to reconcile the threat he'd perceived with the calm voice speaking to him now. Slowly, carefully, Leanne lowered her hands. Not to reach for him. That would be too much, too fast. Just to show she wasn't holding weapons, wasn't preparing to force anything. "That's it," she murmured. "Just like that. You're safe. I'm safe. We're both safe." Devil's Creek took one step back, then another. His head lowered slightly, the aggressive posture easing into something more uncertain, more confused. Like he couldn't quite understand why she wasn't running, why she wasn't attacking, why she was just standing there talking to him like nothing had happened. "Good boy," Leanne whispered. "Such a good, brave boy. You didn't hurt anyone. You protected yourself and then you chose not to hurt me. That's everything. That's all I needed to know." Outside the corral, she could hear Tommy cursing, could hear running footsteps. Someone must have seen what happened, must be coming to help or witness, or both. But Leanne kept her focus on the horse, on this moment that could still tip either way into violence or something else. Devil's Creek shook his head, snorted, then turned and walked to the far side of the corral. Not fleeing exactly, but creating distance, processing what had just happened in whatever way horses processed near disasters. Only then did Leanne allow herself to move. She walked slowly to the gate, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, and let herself out. Tommy was sitting in the dirt outside the fence, his face white, his good hand clutching his casted arm like it hurt again. Pete stood beside him, looking between Leanne and the horse, with an expression caught between shock and something that might have been awe. "What the hell were you thinking?" Pete demanded, but Leanne couldn't tell if he was talking to her or Tommy. "I was thinking I needed to stop someone from getting killed," Leanne said, her voice rougher than she intended. The fear was catching up to her now, making her hands shake and her stomach turn. "What the hell were you thinking, Tommy? Going in there with a rope and an attitude?" "I just wanted to," Tommy started, "to prove something." "I know. I understand." Leanne crouched down beside him, ignoring the protest from her exhausted muscles. "But you can't prove strength by forcing submission. That's not strength. That's just fear dressed up as power." "I wasn't afraid," Tommy said, but his voice cracked on the words. "Yes, you were. You were afraid that breaking your arm made you less capable. Afraid that I was succeeding where you'd failed. Afraid that if you didn't fix this horse, everyone would think you were weak." Leanne's voice softened. "But going in there angry and scared, that's what almost got you killed." Tommy looked away, his jaw working. The horse needs to learn respect. The horse needs to learn trust. There's a difference. Leanne stood, her legs still unsteady. Respect without trust is just fear. And fear makes animals, all of us, do dangerous things. Pete helped Tommy to his feet, the older man's face grave. "You're lucky she was here. That horse was about to cave your skull in." "I know," Tommy said quietly. "And you're lucky Caleb wasn't here to see it because he'd fire you for stupidity." Pete's voice was harsh, but not unkind. "You don't go into a corral with a known dangerous animal without backup, without proper equipment, without a plan. You know better." "I thought you didn't think. That's the problem." Pete turned to Leanne. "And you. What you just did was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen in 40 years of ranch work. Maybe both." "Probably both," Leanne admitted. Her heart was still racing, her mind replaying that moment when the horse's hooves had been poised above her head, when one wrong choice would have ended everything. "How'd you know he wouldn't strike you?" Pete asked. "I didn't. Not for certain." Leanne looked back at the corral where Devil's Creek stood watching them, still alert but no longer aggressive. "But I knew that horse doesn't want to hurt people. He wants to protect himself. And I was betting that if I showed him I wasn't a threat, he'd choose not to hurt me." "That's a hell of a bet." "Yeah, well, sometimes you don't get to choose safe options. Sometimes you just choose the least terrible option and hope." She turned to Tommy. "Are you hurt? Besides the arm?" "Bruised maybe, scared definitely." He met her eyes for the first time since the incident. Thank you. For stopping him, for stepping in. Thank you for getting out when I told you to, Leanne said. Took guts to back down when every instinct probably told you to fight. Something passed between them then. An understanding, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that they'd both survived something that could have ended badly. Tommy nodded slowly, then let Pete lead him toward the bunkhouse. Leanne stood alone in the yard, watching the sun climb higher, turning the frost from white to gold. Her whole body was shaking now, the delayed fear finally catching up. She'd almost died. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, one miscalculation about what the horse would do, and she'd be dead or dying in the frozen dirt. But she wasn't. And neither was Tommy. And somehow, impossibly, the horse had chosen not to hurt her when he had every opportunity. That had to mean something. She was still standing there when Caleb and the others returned an hour later, their horse's breath steaming in the cold air. Caleb took one look at her face and dismounted quickly. What happened? Tommy went into Devil's Creek's corral with a rope. The horse charged him. Caleb's face went pale. Is Tommy... He's fine. Scared, but fine. Leanne hesitated. I went in after him. Stopped the horse. You what? I got between them, talked the horse down. It worked. Caleb stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Leanne, that horse could have killed you. Yes. You could have died. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes. Leanne met his eyes steadily. What was I supposed to do? Watch Tommy get trampled? Let the horse prove everyone right about being too dangerous to save? Marcus had dismounted and was listening to the exchange with an unreadable expression. Jake stood beside him, equally silent. You were supposed to stay safe, Caleb said, his voice tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. You were supposed to not risk your life for a horse. I didn't risk it for the horse. I risked it for Tommy. And for the possibility that violence isn't the only answer. Leanne's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. And it worked, Caleb. The horse stopped. He chose not to hurt me. That means something. It means you got lucky. Maybe. Or maybe it means he's learning to trust, learning that not every human is going to hurt him. She paused. Isn't that what you wanted when you bought him? A chance for him to be something other than dangerous? Caleb ran his hand through his hair, frustration and fear, and something else warring on his face. Not at the cost of my wife's life. Then you should have married someone less stubborn. The words came out sharper than Leanne intended, edged with her own fear and exhaustion. You wanted someone strong enough for this life. Well, this is what strong looks like. It's not always pretty or safe or smart. Sometimes it's just refusing to back down when backing down would be easier. Marcus cleared his throat. The boy all right? Shaken. Pete's with him. Leanne turned to the old cowboy. He was trying to prove something, that he wasn't weak, that the horse breaking his arm didn't make him less capable. Proving things that way gets people killed, Marcus said flatly. Yes. Which is why I stopped him. Leanne's voice was firm. And which is why I need to keep working with that horse. Because if I stop now, if I let fear win, then Tommy almost died for nothing. And Devil's Creek goes back to being the dangerous animal everyone says he is. Or, Jake said quietly, speaking for the first time, you keep working with him, and next time you're the one who gets hurt. You got lucky today, Leanne. Luck runs out. So does patience, so does fear, so does everything eventually. Leanne looked at each of them in turn. But I'm not asking for permission anymore. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep working with that horse until he trusts me enough to let me touch him, until he understands that humans aren't all threats, until he's healed enough to be useful instead of dangerous. And if you can't, Caleb asked, then I can't. But I have to try. Because giving up now would mean Tommy was right. That force is the only answer. And I don't believe that. I can't believe that. The men stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Marcus spoke. You go in that corral again. Someone's watching. No more solo trips. Too dangerous. It wasn't permission exactly, but it wasn't refusal either. Leanne nodded. Agreed. And you take it slow, Jake added. No more heroics. That wasn't heroics, that was necessity. But Leanne softened her tone. But yes, slow and careful. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue more, to forbid her from going near the horse again, to lock her in the house where she'd be safe. But something in her expression, the determination or the exhaustion or the fear she was trying so hard to hide, stopped him. "All right," he finally said, "but we're having a long talk about this later." "Looking forward to it," Leanne said, meaning it, because talking meant he was treating her like an equal, like someone whose choices mattered even when he disagreed with them. The men dispersed to their various tasks, leaving Leanne alone in the yard. She looked back at the corral one more time. Devil's Creek was standing near the fence now, watching her. Their eyes met across the distance, and Leanne felt something shift in her chest. The horse had chosen not to hurt her. In that moment of ultimate power, when he could have destroyed the thing that stood between him and the perceived threat, he'd pulled back, had listened to her voice, had trusted her enough to stop. It was a beginning. Fragile and terrifying and bought at the cost of almost everything, but a beginning nonetheless. She walked back to the house on shaking legs, her mind replaying those seconds when the hooves had been above her head, when death had been one heartbeat away. She'd never been that close to dying before. Not on the ocean crossing, not in her hardest days in the village, not even in the early weeks on the ranch when she'd felt like an intruder in a hostile world. But she'd chosen it, had seen the danger and walked into it anyway because the alternative, watching Tommy die, watching the horse be destroyed for defending himself, had been worse. Inside the house, she made fresh coffee with hands that finally stopped shaking. She stood at the window watching the ranch move through its routines and thought about courage. Real courage, not the kind in stories, but the kind that meant doing the terrifying thing even when your body screamed at you to run. Her mother had told her once that bravery was a luxury poor women couldn't afford, that survival meant being smart, not bold, making yourself small enough that the world forgot to hurt you. But Leanne was done making herself small, done surviving by disappearing. If this ranch was going to be her home, if this life was going to be hers, then she needed to claim space in it. Needed to be the kind of person who stepped between danger and destruction instead of hiding from both. Even if it scared her, even if it almost killed her, even if every logical part of her mind said she was being reckless and stupid and asking for disaster. Because the alternative was going back to being invisible, and Leanne had crossed an ocean to be seen. That afternoon, when the sun was high and the frost had melted into mud, Leanne returned to the corral. Pete came with her as promised, standing at a respectful distance but ready to intervene if needed. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Devil's Creek watched her approach, his posture wary but not immediately aggressive. The morning's chaos had left its mark. He was jumpier, more alert, like he'd been reminded that threats could come without warning. Lynn stopped at the fence, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "I'm sorry about this morning," she said quietly. "I'm sorry someone scared you. I'm sorry I had to come into your space without asking. I know that broke the trust we were building." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. "But I'm here now, and I'm going to keep being here, every day, until you understand that I'm not like the others, that I see you as more than a problem to fix or a danger to eliminate." She paused. "You're scared and hurt and angry at a world that hasn't been kind. I know because I'm all those things too. And if we can find a way through it together, maybe we both come out less broken on the other side." Devil's Creek took 3 steps toward the fence, closer than he'd ever come voluntarily, close enough that Leanne could see the white ring around his eye, the way his nostrils flared with each breath, the scar on his shoulder that spoke of old pain. "That's it," she murmured. "You decide how close. You decide when. I'm just here." The horse stopped an arm's length from the fence, watching her, waiting for something, though what, Leanne couldn't say. She lowered herself to sit in the frozen mud, her back against a fence post, her hands loose in her lap. Pete made a sound of protest behind her, but she ignored it. This needed to happen at the horse's eye level, needed to be an offer of vulnerability instead of dominance. "I'm going to sit here for a while," Leanne said. "You do whatever you need to do. Pace if you want. Stand if you want. Come close if you want. It's your choice." And she waited. The cold seeped through her clothes. Her muscles, already exhausted from fence work and morning terror, began to stiffen. Her hands went numb. But she didn't move, didn't stand, didn't give up the position of deliberate vulnerability she'd chosen. Devil's Creek paced for a few minutes, clearly uncertain what to make of this change in routine. Then he stopped. turned, walked slowly to the fence and lowered his head to Leanne's level. They stayed like that for uncounted minutes, woman and horse, separated by wood but connected by something neither could name. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it, hanging in the cold air like breath made visible. Finally, just as Leanne thought her frozen body might refuse to move ever again, the horse did something extraordinary. He lowered his muzzle to the ground, to the space near Leanne's shoulder, and breathed out slowly. A horse's version of a sigh, of release, of the tension leaving a body that had held it too long. "Yeah," Leanne whispered. "I know that feeling." When she finally stood, her legs barely cooperated. Pete had to help her to her feet, had to support her weight until circulation returned and muscles remembered how to work. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen," he said, shaking his head. "And I've seen a lot of crazy things." "Did it work?" Leanne asked. "Did it look like progress to you?" "Hell if I know. I'm just a ranch hand, not a horse psychologist." But Pete's weathered face held something like respect. "But I'll say this. That animal didn't try to kill you. After the morning you both had, that's something." It was something. Leanne held on to that thought as she limped back to the house, as she forced her frozen hands to work well enough to start dinner, as she moved through the evening's routines with a body that wanted nothing more than to collapse. When Caleb came in for dinner, he found her at the stove, stirring stew that was probably the simplest meal she'd ever served. He washed up without comment, sat at the table, waited. "We need to talk," he finally said. "I know. What you did this morning saved Tommy's life. Maybe saved the horse's too." Leanne kept stirring, kept her eyes on the pot. "I know it was dangerous. I know it was reckless. I know it scared you and probably made you question whether bringing me here was a mistake." "It didn't make me question that," Caleb said quietly. "It made me realize I married someone braver than I gave her credit for. And that terrifies me." Leanne looked at him then, his honest face, his worried eyes, his hands rough from a lifetime of hard work. "You wanted someone strong. I wanted a partner, someone who could stand beside me, not someone who'd run headfirst into danger." He paused. "But I'm starting to think those might be the same thing in you, that your strength and your recklessness come from the same place. Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." Caleb's voice held honesty more than judgment. "Ask me again when I'm not still seeing you with a horse's hooves above your head." They ate in silence, the weight of the day settling over both of them. Outside, night was falling fast, the temperature dropping with it. Winter was coming whether they were ready or not. And inside, two people who'd married as strangers were slowly learning what it meant to be partners in a life that was harder and stranger than either had imagined. Later that night, long after the dishes were washed and the lamps turned low, Leanne lay awake listening to the wind test the corners of the house. Beside her, Caleb's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, but rest wouldn't come for her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the horse's hooves suspended above her head, felt that split second of absolute certainty that she was about to die. She slipped out of bed carefully and padded to the window. The ranch yard was silver with moonlight, every shadow sharp-edged and strange. And there, in the far corral, Devil's Creek stood awake as always, his dark shape a blot against the frost-pale ground. Watching, waiting, unable to rest. Lynn understood that more than she'd admitted to anyone. The sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the feeling that letting your guard down even for a moment would invite disaster. She'd felt it on the ship crossing the Pacific, surrounded by strangers in a metal box on an endless sea. She'd felt it her first weeks on the ranch, knowing that one mistake could confirm every doubt the hands harbored about her. And she felt it now, after nearly dying, after proving she could be reckless and brave in equal measure. The difference was, she was learning to live with it. Learning that fear didn't have to mean paralysis. That courage wasn't the absence of terror, but the choice to act despite it. The horse was learning too, slower, more painfully, but learning nonetheless. She must have stood there longer than she realized, because when Caleb's voice came from the bed, rough with sleep, she startled. "You all right?" "Can't sleep." He was quiet for a moment, then the mattress creaked as he sat up. "Come here." Leanne returned to bed, let Caleb pull her close. His body was warm, solid, real in a way that anchored her to something beyond fear and memory. "Tell me about the village," he said quietly. about your father and the dog. Why? Because I want to understand where you learned to do what you did today, where that kind of certainty comes from. Leanne was silent for a long time, organizing thoughts she rarely let herself examine. My father wasn't a brave man by most measures. He was a fisherman who did the same work his father had done, who never questioned the way things were. But he had this quality. He could see when something was hurting and respond to that hurt with patience instead of force. The dog. The dog, yes, but also me. Her voice caught slightly. When I was 12, there was a boy in the village. Older, stronger. He cornered me one day near the docks, said things that made my skin crawl. When I fought back, scratched his face, he hit me hard enough that I saw stars, told me girls who fought got what they deserved. Caleb's arms tightened around her. I ran home crying. My mother said I shouldn't have been alone near the docks, that I'd brought shame on our family, that I needed to learn to be quieter, smaller, less likely to provoke. But my father... Leanne paused, remembering. My father said nothing for a long time. Then he took me out in the boat, just the two of us. We sat in the water while the sun went down, and he said, "The ocean doesn't apologize for being powerful. It doesn't make itself smaller so boats feel safe. It just is what it is, and we learn to respect that or we drown." Wise man. Maybe, or maybe just tired of watching women shrink themselves. Leanne shifted to look at Caleb's face in the darkness. He told me that day that I had two choices. I could let that boy's violence teach me to be afraid, to make myself small and quiet and forgettable, or I could let it teach me that some people would always see my strength as a threat, and I could choose to be strong anyway. You chose strong. I chose stubborn. Strong came later, after a lot of practice. She smiled slightly. The boy's family wanted my father to punish me for scarring their son's face. He refused, said the boy had gotten what he earned, and if they didn't like it, they could take it up with the ocean for making his daughter the way she was. How'd that go over? Badly. We were ostracized for months. My mother never forgave me. Said I'd ruined any chance of a decent marriage, that no man would want a wife who fought back. Leanne's voice was matter of fact, the old hurt worn smooth by time and distance. She was right, in a way. No man in the village would have me. Which is why when I saw your advertisement, I answered, figured a stranger across an ocean might be less offended by a woman with scars and opinions than the men who'd known me all my life. I'm not offended, Caleb said quietly. I'm terrified sometimes, and angry when you risk yourself, and constantly worried I'm not enough for someone like you, but never offended. Someone like me? Someone who chose to be strong when the world kept telling her to be small. He pressed a kiss to her hair. That horse chose you for the same reason, I think. He recognized something familiar. Leanne thought about that. You think the horse knows I'm scared? I think the horse knows you're scared and you show up anyway. That's probably the only language he understands anymore. The choice to keep trying even when every instinct says run. They lay together in the darkness. Two people learning to be married, learning that honesty was harder and more valuable than comfort. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of winter's approach. Tomorrow, Leanne said, I want to try something different with him. What? I want to stop waiting for him to come to me. I want to go in the corral, not to force anything, just to share the space. Let him get used to my presence inside his territory instead of always outside it. Caleb was quiet for so long that Leanne thought he might have fallen back asleep. Then, that's what got Tommy hurt. Tommy went in aggressive with a rope and an agenda. I'll go in empty-handed with nothing but patience. She felt Caleb's resistance in the tension of his body. I need to do this, Caleb. For the horse, yes, but also for myself. I need to prove that what happened this morning wasn't just luck or instinct, that I actually understand something about fear and trust that might help. And if you're wrong, then I'm wrong, but I'd rather fail trying than succeed at staying safe. She turned to face him fully. You chose someone who crossed an ocean to marry a stranger. That wasn't the choice of someone who prioritizes safety. No, Caleb admitted. No, it wasn't. Another long pause. I'll be there, right outside the corral, first sign of trouble. You pull me out, I know. Leanne kissed him, brief and fierce. Thank you for letting me try. I'm not sure letting is the right word. More like accepting I can't stop you. That's love too, Leanne said. Accepting someone as they are instead of trying to reshape them into something safer. This time, when she closed her eyes, sleep came easier. Not dreamless, her mind replayed the morning's terror in fragments and flashes, but deep enough to rest. And when she woke before dawn, Caleb was already up, coffee made, her warmest clothes laid out on the chair. They didn't talk much over breakfast. Some mornings were like that, companionable silence replacing words. But when Leanne rose to leave, Caleb caught her hand. Be careful, he said. Always. Leanne, I mean it. I know. I will be. She squeezed his hand. I'm not trying to be reckless. I'm trying to be deliberate. There's a difference. The difference being, reckless is acting without thought. Deliberate is acting despite fear after careful thought. She smiled slightly. I'm terrified, Caleb. Every time I go near that horse, I'm scared. But I think he needs to see that someone can be afraid and still choose trust, because that's what I'm asking him to do. Outside, the morning was brutally cold. Frost had given way to a thin skiff of snow overnight, just enough to make the world look clean and new. Leanne's breath clouded white as she crossed the yard to where Pete was already waiting by the corral, stamping his feet against the cold. You sure about this? He asked, for the second time in as many days. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Devil's Creek was at the far end of the corral, watching their approach with that hyper-alert posture that meant he'd probably been awake all night. When he saw Leanne, his ears came forward slightly, not relaxed but interested, tracking her movement. Leanne stopped at the gate, her hand on the latch, but not opening it yet. I'm coming in, she said, loud enough for the horse to hear. Not to chase you, not to catch you, just to be in the same space. You can stay on your side, I'll stay on mine. We're just practicing being near each other. Pete shook his head. You know he can't understand English. Maybe not the words, but he understands tone, intent, and I need to hear myself say it, even if he doesn't comprehend every word. Leanne took a breath. If he charges, I'm coming right back out. No heroics today. That's the smartest thing you've said all week. She opened the gate slowly, the hinges creaking in the cold. Devil's Creek's head came up sharply, his muscles coiling, but he didn't move toward her, didn't charge or scream or show the explosive violence of yesterday. Leanne stepped inside and closed the gate behind her. The feeling of being in the corral with the horse was completely different from being outside it. Out there, she'd had the fence between them, had the option of distance. In here, there was nowhere to hide, no barrier to stop him if he decided she was a threat. Her heart hammered. Her mouth went dry. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to get out, to put the fence back between herself and danger. But she stood her ground. Okay, she said quietly. Here we are. Both of us scared, both of us trying to figure this out. Devil's Creek took 2 steps toward her, then stopped. His nostrils flared, scenting the air. Reading her fear, probably. Horses were good at that. They could smell adrenaline, could sense the chemical changes that came with terror. Leanne forced herself to breathe slowly, deeply. She couldn't eliminate the fear, but she could stop feeding it with shallow, panicked breaths. Could show the horse that fear didn't have to mean fight or flight. I'm just going to stand here, she continued, using her voice as much to calm herself as the horse. And you can do whatever you need to do. Pace if you want. Come closer if you want. Move away if you want. This is your space. I'm just visiting. The horse stood very still for a long moment, as if he couldn't quite believe she wasn't going to chase him, or corner him, or force some kind of confrontation. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and took a single bite of the hay scattered on the ground. Not because he was hungry, Leanne suspected, but because eating was what horses did when they started to relax, when they felt safe enough to engage in normal behaviors instead of constant vigilance. It was progress. Tiny, fragile, but real. Leanne eased herself down to sit in the snow, moving slowly so as not to startle him. The cold immediately soaked through her clothes, but she ignored it. This needed to happen at a level that wasn't looming, wasn't dominant, wasn't threatening. Devil's Creek watched her lower herself to the ground, his ears swiveling forward with what might have been curiosity. Then he took another bite of hay. Another. His tail swished once, not in agitation, but in the absent way horses moved when they were thinking. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Woman sitting in snow, horse pretending to eat while surreptitiously watching her. The sun climbed higher, burning off some of the cold, but not much. Leanne's legs went numb. Her hands started to lose feeling despite her gloves. But she didn't move, didn't push, just existed in the same space as the horse, showing him that presence didn't have to equal threat. Finally, when her body was screaming at her to stand, to move, to do something other than freeze to death in a corral, Devil's Creek did something remarkable. He walked toward her, not charging, not aggressive, just walking, slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something he didn't quite trust but found compelling anyway. Leanne's breath caught. Every muscle tensed, but she forced herself to stay still, to keep her hands in her lap, to let the horse make this choice entirely on his own terms. He came within 10 feet, then 5. Then close enough that she could see the frost forming on his whiskers, could hear the sound of his breathing, could smell the warm horse scent of him. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey, brave boy. Look at you making choices." Devil's Creek lowered his head to her level. His dark eyes met hers, and Leanne saw something in them she hadn't seen before. Not trust exactly, but consideration. Like he was actively trying to understand what she was, instead of just reacting to her presence. She didn't reach out, didn't move, just held his gaze and let him look his fill. Then, in a gesture so unexpected it made Leanne's eyes sting, the horse extended his muzzle and blew softly on her face. Warm breath in the cold air, the horse equivalent of a handshake, a greeting, an acknowledgement. "Yeah," Leanne said, her voice breaking slightly. "I see you too." For 30 seconds, maybe a minute, they stayed like that. Close enough to touch, but not touching. Close enough for violence, but choosing stillness. Two scared, stubborn creatures finding something like understanding in the space between fear and trust. Then Devil's Creek lifted his head, turned, and walked away. Not fleeing, just done with the interaction on his own terms. He moved to the far side of the corral and resumed his pacing, but it looked different now, less frantic, less desperate. Lynn sat for another few minutes, letting the enormity of what had just happened sink in. Then she stood on numb legs and made her way to the gate. Pete had his hand on the latch, ready to throw it open if needed. His weathered face showed shock. "Did that just happen?" he asked. "I think so, unless we both hallucinated." "He came up to you, voluntarily." "He did. And didn't try to kill you." "That too." Pete shook his head slowly. 40 years I've worked with horses. Never seen anything like that. That horse was broke beyond fixing a month ago, and now he's approaching people like it's nothing." "It's not nothing to him," Leanne said. "Every step toward me was probably terrifying, but he did it anyway." She looked back at the corral where Devil's Creek stood watching them. "He's braver than anyone gives him credit for, including himself." "What now?" Pete asked. "Now I do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until being near me is boring instead of terrifying." Leanne's legs were shaking from cold and adrenaline, but she felt lighter than she had in days. Trust isn't built in one moment. It's built in 100 moments of choosing not to hurt each other. She made it halfway back to the house before her legs gave out, just stopped working, dropped her to her knees in the snow. Not from fear this time, but from the sheer physical toll of holding herself together while every nerve screamed danger. Caleb was there immediately, must have been watching from somewhere. He lifted her easily, carried her the rest of the way inside, set her by the stove. "Your hands are ice," he said, chafing them between his. "How long were you in there?" "Don't know. Long enough." Her teeth were chattering now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "He came to me, Caleb. All the way across the corral, breathed on my face like horses do when they're greeting each other." "I saw." Caleb wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, pulled her close. "I saw, and I aged 10 years watching it." "But you didn't interfere." "No. Wanted to. Nearly did 3 times, but you were right. It had to be his choice." He held her tighter. "Doesn't mean I have to like watching my wife sit in the snow while a dangerous horse decides whether to trust or trample her." He chose trust. This time. Next time might be different. Or next time might be easier. Leanne leaned into Caleb's warmth, letting her body finally relax. "I'm learning his language, Caleb. Starting to understand what his movements mean, when he's scared versus curious versus overwhelmed. It's like learning Mandarin or in English. At first it's all noise, but gradually patterns emerge. Meanings become clear. And what's he telling you? Leanne thought about the horse's approach, the deliberate slowness of it, the way he'd stopped just short of touching distance. He's saying he wants to trust but doesn't know how. That every time he starts to relax, something reminds him that trust got him hurt before. So he's testing, coming close, then retreating, seeing if I'll punish the approach or allow the retreat without judgment. What are you telling him back? That I'll be here regardless. That his fear doesn't make him broken. That healing doesn't have a timeline. She pulled back to look at Caleb's face. Same things I'm trying to tell myself. Understanding flickered in his eyes. You're not just training the horse. No. I'm training myself to believe that being scared doesn't mean being weak. That you can be terrified and still show up. That trust is worth the risk even when risk has teeth and hooves. Her voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. And maybe if I can convince the horse, I'll start convincing myself too. Caleb kissed her forehead, her cheek, her mouth. You're the strongest person I know, he said quietly, and the most terrifying. And I'm grateful every day that you chose this life. Even when I'm risking my neck? Especially then, because it means you care enough about something to fight for it. He stood, pulled her up with him. But right now you're getting warm food and hot tea, and you're resting until feeling returns to all your extremities. Leanne didn't argue. She let Caleb fuss, let him make her tea and toast, let him wrap her in blankets until she looked ridiculous. Because this was partnership too. Letting someone care for you when you'd spent all your strength caring for something else. The rest of the day passed in a blur of warmth and rest. Leanne dozed by the fire, her body finally demanding the sleep she'd denied it the night before. When she woke, it was late afternoon, the light already fading toward evening. She found Marcus in the barn, mending tack. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. Heard you had a breakthrough with the horse, he said. Maybe. Or maybe just one good moment in a sea of difficult ones. Marcus nodded slowly. That's ranch work. That's life, really. You take the good moments when they come and try not to let the hard ones break you. Is that your way of saying I'm doing okay? It's my way of saying I was wrong about you. He set down the bridle he'd been working on. Thought Caleb was making a mistake, bringing in a foreign wife who didn't know ranch ways. Thought you'd last a month before running back to wherever you came from. I'm stubborn. Yeah, that you are, like... Marcus's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. But you're also learning fast, working hard, and not making excuses when things get difficult. That's worth more than knowing ranch ways from birth. Coming from Marcus, it was practically a declaration of love. Leanne felt something warm settle in her chest. Thank you. That means a lot. Don't let it go to your head. You're still green as grass about half of ranch work. But his tone was fond now, gruff but genuine. Just means you've got room to grow instead of thinking you know everything already. I definitely don't know everything. Good. Day you think you do is the day you stop learning. He picked up the bridle again, his hands moving with the muscle memory of decades. That horse is lucky to have you. Probably doesn't know it yet, but he is. I'm lucky to have him too. He's teaching me things I didn't know I needed to learn. Like what? Like how to be patient with myself. How to recognize that healing isn't linear. How to show up for something even when I'm terrified. Leanne leaned against a post, watching Marcus work. And how to accept that sometimes being broken isn't permanent. Sometimes it's just the state you're in before you learn how to be whole in a different way. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You talking about the horse or yourself? Both. Neither. Does it matter? Suppose not. He finished the stitch he was working on, tested the strength of the repair. My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. Took her fast, which I guess was a mercy, but it didn't feel like one at the time. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Leanne heard the pain underneath. After she passed, I thought I was done. Thought I'd just work until I couldn't work anymore, then die. Didn't see the point in much else. What changed? Nothing changed. I'm still working toward the same end, but somewhere along the way I realized that being broken doesn't mean being useless, that you can be grieving and still show up for the work, that wholeness isn't required for living, just for pretending everything's fine. He looked at her directly. That horse is teaching you what loss taught me. That surviving doesn't mean being unscathed. It just means being willing to keep going anyway. Leanne didn't know what to say to that. The honesty was unexpected, the vulnerability rare from a man who usually kept his emotions locked behind gruffness and routine. "Thank you for telling me that," she finally said. "Yeah, well, don't spread it around. Got a reputation to maintain." But Marcus's eyes were kind. "Point is, you're doing good work with that horse, and with yourself. Don't stop just because it gets hard." "Wasn't planning on it." "Good." Leanne left him to his tack mending and walked out into the early evening. The temperature was dropping fast, winter settling in with the kind of cold that made breath hurt. Snow was coming, the real kind that would last until spring. The ranch was preparing, extra hay stockpiled, fences reinforced, equipment sheltered. And in the far corral, Devil's Creek stood watching the house with what might have been expectation. Tomorrow, Leanne would go back, would sit in the cold, would offer her presence, would continue the slow, difficult work of building trust with a creature that had every reason to reject it. But tonight, she stood in the yard watching the first stars appear and thought about Marcus's words, about being broken and useful, about surviving without being unscathed, about all the ways people and horses learned to keep going when everything told them to quit. She thought about her father and his patient dog, about the boy who'd hit her and the man who'd defended her, about the village she'd left and the ranch she was claiming as home. And she thought about tomorrow, when she'd wake up and do it all again. The fear, the cold, the slow accumulation of small moments that might eventually add up to something like trust. It wasn't the life she'd imagined answering that advertisement. It was harder, stranger, more terrifying. But it was hers, and she was choosing it. Every day, every frozen morning, every moment of sitting in the snow while a scared horse decided whether to believe in her. She was choosing it, and that made all the difference. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that became almost meditative. Every morning, Leanne went to the corral. Every morning, she sat in the cold while Devil's Creek decided whether to acknowledge her. And every morning, he came a little closer, stayed a little longer, relaxed a fraction more into her presence. The ranch hands stopped watching with skepticism and started watching with something closer to respect. Even Tommy, whose pride had nearly gotten him killed, began asking questions about her approach instead of dismissing it outright. "How do you know when he's ready for more?" Tommy asked one afternoon. His casted arm nearly healed now, the doctor saying another week and he'd be free of it. Leanne was cleaning vegetables at the kitchen sink, her hands moving automatically while her mind was partly still with the horse. "I don't know," she admitted. "Not for certain. I just watch for the small changes, the way his ears stay forward longer, how he doesn't flinch when I shift position, the moments when he chooses to stay close instead of creating distance." "That's it? Just watching?" "Just watching, just being patient, just trusting that he'll tell me when he's ready for the next step." She paused, considering. "It's like learning to read someone's face for truth instead of listening to their words. The body doesn't lie the way language can." Tommy nodded slowly. "I rushed it. When I went in there with the rope, I thought force would be faster than patience." "Force is faster," Leanne agreed, "until it breaks what you're trying to fix." "Yeah." He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry. For putting you in danger. For almost ruining what you were building with him." "You didn't ruin anything. You just reminded both of us that trust is fragile." She looked at him directly. "But you also gave us a chance to prove that even when trust breaks, it can be rebuilt. That's worth something too." The conversation stayed with Leanne as she returned to the corral that evening. The sun was setting earlier now, winter asserting itself with shorter days and longer nights. Snow had fallen steadily for the past 3 days, turning the ranch into something from a painting, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. Devil's Creek was waiting at the fence, which was new. Usually he made her come to him, made her prove her commitment by showing up regardless of weather or exhaustion. But today he stood near the gate, his breath clouding white in the cold air, his dark eyes watching the house as if he'd been waiting for her specifically. "Hey," Leanne said softly as she approached. "You're eager today." The horse's ears flicked forward at her voice. He didn't move away when she opened the gate, didn't retreat when she stepped inside, just watched with that intense focus horses had when they were trying to understand something. Leanne moved to her usual spot against the fence and lowered herself to sit. The snow soaked through her clothes immediately, but she barely noticed anymore. Cold was just part of the process now, something to endure rather than fight. But today, Devil's Creek didn't make her wait. He walked straight to her, closing the distance in a few long strides, and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could have touched him, close enough that his warmth fought back the cold. "Well," Leanne whispered, "this is different." The horse lowered his head to her level, just like he had that first breakthrough day. But this time, instead of breathing on her face and retreating, he stayed, held position, waiting. Leanne's heart was hammering. This felt like a threshold, a moment that could tip either way into progress or disaster. She kept her hands in her lap, kept her breathing steady, kept every muscle relaxed despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You're so close," she murmured. "Closer than you've ever been. What do you need from me, brave boy? What are you trying to tell me?" Devil's Creek shifted his weight, and Leanne suddenly understood. He wasn't just approaching, he was offering, giving her the opportunity to close the final distance if she chose to. The choice to touch or not touch was hers. Her hands were shaking as she slowly, incrementally raised one from her lap. The movement was so gradual it barely qualified as motion. Devil's Creek's eyes tracked it, his ears swiveling, his entire body poised for flight. But he didn't move away. "I'm going to touch you now," Leanne said quietly. "Just my hand on your nose, nothing more. And if you don't like it, you can leave. No punishment, no forcing, no judgment, just your choice." She extended her hand the final few inches, and her palm met the warm velvet of the horse's muzzle. The contact was electric. Devil's Creek's entire body tensed, every muscle coiling, and Leanne thought for sure he'd bolt. But he held steady. Let her hand rest against his face. Let her touch him despite every instinct that probably screamed danger. "Good boy," Leanne breathed. "Such a good, brave boy. You're doing so well." They stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. Woman's hand on horse's face, both of them trembling with the enormity of this small gesture. Then Devil's Creek exhaled slowly, a release of tension that Leanne felt in her own body, and pushed gently into her palm. Not aggressive, seeking, like he'd forgotten what gentle touch felt like and was trying to remember. Leanne's eyes stung with tears that had nothing to do with the cold. She kept her hand steady, kept her touch light. Let the horse lean into the contact as much or as little as he wanted. "I see you," she whispered. "I see how hard this is. I see you choosing trust even though trust hurt you before. You're so much braver than anyone knows." After a minute, maybe two, Devil's Creek lifted his head and stepped back, creating distance on his own terms, ending the interaction when he'd had enough. He didn't run, didn't panic, just moved to the center of the corral and stood there processing. Leanne sat in the snow, her hands still warm from the contact, and cried. Not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. A horse that had been broken by violence had just chosen gentleness, had allowed touch from a human despite every reason to refuse it. It was more than progress. It was transformation. She was still sitting there, tears freezing on her face, when Caleb appeared at the fence. "I saw," he said quietly, "from the barn. I saw him let you touch him." "He chose it," Leanne said, her voice thick. "I didn't force or trick or coerce. He made the choice himself." "I know." Caleb climbed into the corral, something he rarely did, and helped her to her feet. Her legs had gone completely numb. "I know, and I'm so proud of you I don't have words for it. It wasn't me. It was him. His courage. His choice. It was both of you." Caleb held her close, sharing warmth. "You showed him a different way was possible. He chose to believe you. That's partnership." They stood together in the snow while Devil's Creek watched from a distance. The horse's posture was different now, not relaxed exactly, but not coiled for violence either. Something in between. Something like a creature beginning to remember that the world could hold gentleness alongside danger. That night the ranch gathered for dinner. Marcus had shot a deer and they made venison stew that filled the kitchen with warmth and rich smells. The hands sat around the table, Marcus, Jake, Tommy, Pete, and a few others who drifted in from the bunkhouse when food smells promised something better than their usual fare. Leanne served the meal, but this time when she sat down, there was a chair waiting for her at the table. Not an afterthought, not a concession, but a place that had been deliberately saved. "Heard you made contact with Devil's Creek today," Jake said, ladling stew into his bowl. "Full touch, hand to face." "I did." "How'd it feel?" Leanne thought about the question, about the warm velvet of the horse's muzzle and the trembling she'd felt in both their bodies. Like a promise being kept, like proof that patience is stronger than force. "Poetic," Marcus said, but without mockery. "Also accurate. That horse was minutes from being put down a month ago. Now he's accepting touch. That's not luck. That's skill." "It's understanding," Leanne corrected gently. "Understanding that fear makes creatures dangerous, but it doesn't make them irredeemable. And that healing happens on its own timeline, not ours." Tommy cleared his throat. "I learned something from watching you work with him. About myself, I guess." The table went quiet, all eyes on the young ranch hand. "I thought strength meant never backing down, never showing weakness, never admitting when something was too much for me." His voice was steady despite the obvious difficulty of the admission. "But watching you sit in the cold day after day, getting nowhere sometimes and making tiny progress other times, never giving up but also never forcing, that taught me that real strength is knowing when to push and when to wait." "That's wise," Leanne said softly. "Took me a long time to learn it. Still learning, really." "We're all still learning," Caleb added. "Anyone who thinks they know everything about working with animals or people or life in general is either lying or delusional." "Or Marcus," Jake said with a grin, and the table erupted in laughter, even Marcus cracking a smile. The evening passed in warmth and companionship, the kind that came from shared work and mutual respect. These men who doubted her were becoming something like family, rough and imperfect, but genuine. And Leanne, who'd crossed an ocean to escape a village that saw her as a burden, was finding her place in a world that was learning to value her exactly as she was. Later, lying in bed beside Caleb, Leanne stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow. "I want to try leading him," she said into the darkness. Caleb shifted. "Leading him how?" "With a rope. Not to force him, just to see if he'll follow. If he trusts me enough to let me guide him around the corral." She felt Caleb's tension even in the dark. "I think he's ready, and I think if I don't try soon, I'll lose my nerve." "What if he's not ready?" "Then he'll tell me, and I'll back off. But I have to try, Caleb. We can't stay in this limbo forever. Me touching him, but nothing more. Eventually he needs to be useful. That's what saves him long term. Not just tolerance, but purpose." Caleb was quiet for a long time. "When?" "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." "I'll be there." "I know." But the weather didn't hold. A storm rolled in overnight, dumping 2 feet of snow and bringing winds that howled like living things. The ranch shut down to essential work only, feeding animals, keeping paths clear, making sure nothing froze that couldn't afford to freeze. Leanne spent the day cooking, baking bread, and preparing meals that would last, keeping the stove hot so the house stayed warm. But her mind was with the horse, wondering if he was cold, if he was scared, if he understood that she hadn't abandoned him when she didn't come to the corral. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being housebound, of watching the world turn white beyond the windows, of the ranch becoming an island in a sea of snow. When the weather finally broke, Leanne was out the door before breakfast was fully prepared, leaving Caleb to finish the coffee while she fought through snowdrifts to reach the far corral. Devil's Creek was standing near the fence, covered in snow but otherwise fine. When he saw her, his head came up sharply, and he whinnied, the first sound she'd heard him make that wasn't a scream of rage or terror. It sounded almost like a greeting. "I'm sorry," Leanne called out, fighting her way through the snow. "I'm sorry I couldn't come. The storm was too bad. But I'm here now. I didn't forget you." She reached the fence, breathless from the exertion, and Devil's Creek came straight to her, pushed his nose through the rails, seeking contact, seeking reassurance that she was real and present, and hadn't disappeared like everything else good in his life probably had. Lynn pressed her forehead to his, feeling the warmth of him through the cold. "I'm here," she whispered. "Always going to be here. That's the deal. You trust me, I show up, no matter what." The horse breathed out slowly, his breath warm on her face. When she entered the corral, he didn't retreat. When she pulled the lead rope from her pocket, soft cotton, nothing harsh or frightening, he didn't bolt. He just watched, waiting to see what she'd do. I want to try something, Leanne said, moving slowly, telegraphing every motion. I want to see if you'll let me put this rope around your neck, not to force you anywhere, just to connect us. And then maybe, if you're okay with it, we'll walk together, just around the corral, you and me, practicing moving as a team. She approached slowly, the rope loose in her hands. Devil's Creek's muscles tensed, his eyes showed white around the edges, but he didn't move away, didn't charge, just stood there trembling as Leanne got close enough to touch. That's it, she murmured. You're doing so well. You're so brave. She lifted the rope slowly, giving him every opportunity to refuse, to run, to reject this new step. But Devil's Creek held still, held steady, and let her loop the soft cotton around his neck. The moment the rope settled into place, the horse's entire body went rigid. His breathing accelerated. His eyes went wild. And Leanne knew she had maybe 5 seconds before he panicked completely. Easy, she said firmly. Easy now. It's just rope. Just connection. Doesn't mean pain. Doesn't mean force. She kept her voice rhythmic, steady, anchoring. Breathe with me. In and out. That's all we're doing. Just breathing together. Devil's Creek's sides were heaving. Sweat broke out on his coat despite the cold. But he didn't bolt. Didn't rear. Didn't explode into the violence everyone had expected. He just stood there shaking while Leanne held the rope loose and waited for him to find his calm. It took 5 minutes. 5 minutes of talking, breathing, being present while the horse fought his demons. But gradually, incrementally, Devil's Creek's breathing slowed, his muscles unlocked, his eyes cleared. And when Leanne took a single step backward, holding the rope gentle and light, the horse took a step forward, following her, choosing to follow. Good boy, Leanne breathed. Such a good, brave boy. She took another step. The horse followed. Another step. Another following. They moved around the corral in slow circles, woman leading and horse choosing to be led, building a dance of trust that neither had known was possible a month ago. By the time they'd circled the corral 3 times, Devil's Creek was walking beside her instead of behind, his head level with her shoulder, his breathing calm. Not a broken horse being forced to obey, but a partner choosing to move in cooperation. When Leanne finally stopped and removed the rope, the horse didn't flee. He stayed close, pushing his nose into her shoulder, seeking the contact that had become familiar instead of frightening. We did it, Leanne whispered into his mane. We actually did it. She looked up to find the entire ranch watching from the fence. Caleb, Marcus, Jake, Tommy, Pete, all of them standing in the snow, silent witnesses to something they'd thought impossible. Well, I'll be damned, Marcus said finally. That's a broke horse. No, Leanne corrected, walking Devil's Creek toward the fence. That's a healed horse. There's a difference. She opened the gate and led the horse out, actually led him, walking freely beside her with nothing but a loose rope and mutual trust. The hands stepped back, giving them space, their faces showing shock and respect in equal measure. Leanne walked Devil's Creek around the yard once, then back to his corral. She removed the rope, and the horse stood there for a moment, as if deciding what to do with this new freedom. Then he lowered his head and nuzzled her shoulder. Gentle, seeking, a gesture of trust that was worth more than any amount of forced obedience. Go on, Leanne said softly. You did good. Get some rest. Devil's Creek turned and walked back into his corral, his movements calm and purposeful. When he reached the center, he lowered himself to the ground and lay down in the snow. Actually, lay down. Something he'd been too afraid to do since arriving at the ranch, trusting that he was safe enough to truly rest. Jake whistled low. Never thought I'd see that animal sleep. He just needed someone to show him the world wasn't all threat, Leanne said. Once he believed it, he could let go. The men dispersed slowly, heading back to their work, their conversations low and awed. But Caleb stayed, watching Leanne with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Just thinking about the day you arrived. How small you looked getting off that train. How terrified I was that I'd made a mistake bringing you here. He shook his head slowly. And now you're standing in the snow having just accomplished something I've never seen done. Having proven that everything I worried about was backward. What do you mean? I was worried you'd be too gentle for ranch life, too breakable. But gentleness was exactly what this ranch needed, what that horse needed. What I needed, probably, though I didn't know it. Caleb moved closer, pulled her into his arms. You didn't just save the horse, Leanne. You changed how everyone here thinks about strength and patience and what it means to fix something that's broken. I didn't fix him. I just gave him space to fix himself. Same thing. Same principle, anyway. Caleb kissed her forehead. I love you. I know we haven't said it much, that we married as strangers and are still figuring out what we mean to each other. But I love you. And I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to answer that advertisement. Leanne felt tears prick her eyes again, the second time in one day. I love you too. Even though you snore and leave your boots where I trip over them and sometimes forget I exist when you're working on a difficult problem. Hey now, Caleb protested, but he was smiling. I love you for those things too, for being human and imperfect and real. She pulled back to look at his face. We're both broken in our ways, both scared of things we don't talk about. But we're learning to trust each other anyway, aren't we? Just like the horse learned to trust me. Yeah, Caleb said softly. Yeah, we are. The weeks that followed were different. Not easier exactly. Ranch work was still hard, winter was still brutal, and Devil's Creek still had moments when old fears resurfaced. But there was a shift, a fundamental change in how things operated. Lynn worked with the horse daily, building on the foundation of trust they'd established. She taught him to wear a bridle, to accept a saddle, to stand for grooming. Each step was negotiated, not forced. Each new thing introduced slowly, with patience and respect for his fear. And slowly, the dangerous horse everyone had written off became something else. Became useful, became trained, became the kind of horse that Caleb could ride out to check cattle, that Marcus could use for herding, that even Tommy eventually learned to work with. But more than that, Devil's Creek became proof of what everyone had thought impossible. Proof that patience could succeed where force failed, that understanding fear was more powerful than ignoring it, that broken things could become whole again if given enough space and time and stubborn, unreasonable hope. The ranch hands changed too. They started asking Leanne for advice with difficult horses, with cattle that had been traumatized, with any animal that was proving resistant to traditional methods. And gradually, her approach became part of the ranch's culture, not replacing the old ways entirely, but adding to them, expanding what was possible. One evening in late winter, with spring just beginning to show itself in the longer days and melting snow, Leanne stood at the kitchen window watching Devil's Creek graze peacefully in the corral beside the other horses. He'd been integrated into the herd 2 weeks ago, and after some initial posturing, had settled in like he'd always belonged. You thinking about him? Caleb asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Thinking about how far he's come. How far we've all come. We? You, me, the ranch, the horse. All of us. We're all different than we were when I arrived. She leaned back into Caleb's warmth. I was so scared that first month. Scared I'd made a mistake, scared I'd never fit, scared I'd always be the foreign bride everyone resented. And now? Now I'm still scared sometimes. Still foreign in ways that matter. Still learning. She turned to face him. But I'm not trying to fit anymore. I'm just being who I am and letting everyone else adjust to that. Turns out that's easier than trying to become someone they'd accept. For what it's worth, they do accept you. More than accept. They respect you. I know. Took proving myself in ways I didn't expect, but I know. She smiled. Marcus asked me yesterday to work with his friend's horse. Says it's got behavioral issues and traditional training isn't working. He thinks I might have ideas. What'd you say? I said I'd try. That's all I can ever promise. That I'll try, and I'll be patient, and I'll respect what the animal needs instead of what humans want. She paused. It's strange. In my village, I was useless. A burden. A daughter who should have been a son. But here, doing the exact same thing I always did, seeing the scared creature underneath the dangerous behavior, that's valuable. That's a skill people want. It's the same everywhere, Caleb said quietly. The world is full of scared, broken things that people don't know how to help because they've forgotten how to see past the danger to the hurt underneath. You haven't forgotten. That's rare. That's precious. They stood together as darkness fell, watching the horse who'd been too dangerous to save now peacefully existing alongside creatures he would have attacked a few months ago. And Leanne thought about her father's dog, about the patience he'd shown when everyone else wanted quick solutions, about how that lesson had traveled across an ocean and found new expression in Montana snow and ranch work, and a marriage built on gradual understanding. Some things couldn't be rushed. Some transformations required time measured in seasons rather than days. Some forms of healing needed space and patience, and the willingness to show up consistently even when progress was invisible. The horse had taught her that. The ranch had taught her that. Caleb had taught her that. And now she was teaching it to others, spreading the understanding that gentleness was a form of strength, that patience was a kind of power, that broken didn't mean irredeemable. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd answered that advertisement. It was harder, colder, more challenging, but it was also richer, deeper, more meaningful. It was a life where she mattered, where her particular way of seeing the world was valuable instead of burdensome. It was a life she'd chosen and continued choosing. Every frozen morning, every difficult moment, every time fear whispered that she should quit while she was ahead, she chose it, chose the challenge and the cold, and the constant work of building trust with creatures, human and animal, who had every reason to doubt. And in choosing it, she'd become someone she barely recognized from the scared woman who'd stepped off the train 2 months ago. Someone stronger, braver, more certain of her place in the world. The ranch had needed someone willing to see past danger to the herd underneath. The horse had needed someone patient enough to wait for healing instead of forcing compliance. Caleb had needed a partner who could hold her own in a life that didn't make space for weakness. And Leanne had needed all of them, the ranch, the horse, the man, the challenge, to discover that the qualities her village had seen as flaws were actually the exact things that would allow her to thrive in this strange new world. She'd crossed an ocean to escape being invisible, and she'd found a place where her particular way of being visible was exactly what was needed. That was worth all the cold mornings and frozen hands and moments of pure terror when hooves hung above her head. That was worth everything. Outside, Devil's Creek lifted his head from grazing and looked toward the house, toward the window where Leanne stood. And even from a distance, she could see the change in his posture, the relaxation, the trust. He'd learned that humans could be safe, that presence didn't always mean pain, that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt through patience and consistency and stubborn refusal to give up. And in teaching him that, Leanne had learned the same lessons about herself. Some journeys started with fear and ended with trust. Some transformations happened so slowly you almost missed them until you looked back and realized how far you'd come. Some broken things healed, some scared creatures learned to rest. Some foreign brides became exactly what a Montana ranch needed, even when nobody, including themselves, had seen it coming. The snow was melting, spring was coming, and on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, a woman and a horse had both learned that healing was possible if you were brave enough to choose trust over fear. One frozen morning at a time, one small gesture of faith at a time, one moment of choosing connection over safety at a time, until one day you looked up and realized you weren't broken anymore. You were just whole in a different way, changed by what had hurt you, yes, but not defined by it. Free. And that was everything.